This is The Long Road to Ruin. I am your host, the mandated reporter, and frankly, I'm mortified, Mr. Mark Radulich. And tonight, we celebrate Superman Week with an epic 2+ hour podcast discussion of the Christopher Reeve Superman franchise. Superman 1, Superman 2, Superman the Donner Cut, 3, and God help me, Superman 4. There will be no discussion of Superman Returns. That movie stinks. And didn't have Christopher Reeve in it, so there you go. All right, and of course, this is a franchise that is so big. How big is it? It's so big, I not only need my co-host and superhero in his own right, Mr. Sean Comer, to help me out, but we've got not one, but two panelists. So right now, let me bring him out, my co-host in his own right, Mr. Sean Comer. How do you do?
I'm not a big fan of the Boy Scout. I'm really not, and for reasons that I'm going to probably go into extensively. But there have been about 3 good ones out of the whole lot, and I can't say anything one way or another about Man of Steel because I'm not seeing it until this weekend. All things considered, no. It's with all due respect to Jerry Siegel, it just doesn't make me much of a Superman fan.
Look, there are many problems with Superman, many of which, if not all, we will discuss tonight. Let me introduce a man who stepped once more into the breach. Here he is, folks. Everyone loves the bad guy, and this guy thinks you're all weirdos. 401 Sam the Eagle, Mr. Robert Winfree.
I do consider the Superman soundtrack better than the Star Wars soundtrack. And thank heavens that if for whatever reason they didn't go with John Williams to score Man of Steel, they went with Hans Zimmer, because if they get Hans Zimmer to do the next Star Wars trilogy, he will be the new John Williams, and we will all be just as good off as we are now for that.
No, they'll probably get Kesha. And speaking of Kesha...
Why would you do that?
Oh, gut you.
Shut up! We're like 5 minutes into this, and this podcast is already off the rails. Speaking of Kesha, here he is, folks, the Metal Hammer of Doom's author, and my co-host on the 411 Music Zone podcast, my good pal, Mr. Robert Cooper, one of the 3 beards. How do you do, sir?
I like Superman. I really do. Now, the movies, I had not seen 3 and 4 before I came into this. And heck, I haven't even seen the Donner Cut, and I'm really wishing I had not seen 3 or 4, especially 4. 4 was like a movie that was so shitty, I was talking to my dad about it last night, and he had not even heard of it.
Let's get into this. Superman, the franchise, the good, the bad, and the ugly. God, how this thing mirrors the Warner Brothers Batman series pre-Nolan, and in so many ways it's almost scary. I have been known on many times during this podcast to shame and cry and scream and rail against studio executives mucking about with the writers and directors and actors putting together what would have been a good film had the executives not gotten involved. But Jesus Christ, I've never seen one studio fuck up so many movies in all my life. But it didn't start out that way, folks. It didn't start out that way at all. Superman, the motion picture, came out in 1978. It was directed by Richard Donner. And Richard Donner had an epic in mind, a 2-part epic that they shot simultaneously that begins with Superman's origin and ends with his epic battle with General Zod. And as I said, they shot this simultaneously, which is why Superman 2's got all kinds of problems. The first film takes you through his origin. They really didn't change too much about it in the final print, except that they tacked on what was supposed to be the ending for Superman 2 onto the ending of Superman 1, which we'll get to shortly. But throughout the making of both Superman movies, they started running into problems with the studio. They started running into problems with the budget, running into problems called Marlon Brando. And eventually, the studio stepped in and kicked Donner off the film, and they brought in a new director who had a different take on Superman, which is why Superman 2 has sort of a weird feel to it. This is also why we'll be talking about Superman 2 at great length, because you have to discuss 2 different movies. It's the Superman 2 theatrical cut versus the Donner cut. But that's where I want to begin. Let's start with what was supposed to be the first part of Richard Donner's epic 2-part film chronicling the life and times of the Man of Steel, Kal-El, Superman. So, Sean.
Yes.
I was talking about this last night with Jeff Harris. The movie begins with Zod's trial and the subsequent destruction of Krypton. And I said, and I don't want to give too many spoilers away for Man of Steel. If you're interested in knowing what happens in that movie, listen to our Summer Blockbuster podcast. But one of the things that I was saying was, at the very least, in the Donner Superman, that you start with this trial, and they deal with Zod, and no sooner than they deal with Zod, you blink and they're dealing with the imminent destruction of the planet, and the Elder saying, you know, Jor-El, the sky, if you don't say the sky is falling, the sky isn't falling, everything is fine. And then there's another beat, another blink of an eye, and the world is crumbling. And there's almost, it's an interesting take on the beginning, because it almost, it's weird, because movies in the 70s actually give you time to think about what's happening. But in this one, while they took their time, it also simultaneously feels like it was rushed. Like you never really, like they're just trying to get Kal-El off the damn planet and move on with the movie. And so I want to get your sort of impressions of that, and then we'll just kind of go around just discussing that whole first sequence and how people felt about it. So from Zod's trial to Kal-El going up on the spaceship, it's like I said, it's this weird, they're taking time with it, but it also felt rushed. Go ahead, tell me what some of your thoughts are. And actually, talk to Robert, because I have to take a 5-minute break.
Well, I'll just kind of talk to everybody. Really, I had no problem with the opening sequence. I had no problem with it because if you've ever seen, especially Superman 2, the Richard Donner cut, you know really what kind of story Donner wanted to tell. He wanted to tell the kind of story in 2 acts that a lot of movies nowadays think they have to extend into 3 acts. And I think that's a credit to Donner and how ambitious he really was. It doesn't make sense at the very first, but the thing you have to remember, and this is where I'm going to throw in the obligatory warning about spoilers here. If you've never seen the Big Blue Boy Scouts movies, don't watch them, come back, download the podcast later. I promise you I won't be hurt by it. You have to remember that the ending that Donner originally envisioned for Superman 1 was that one of the nukes that Superman tosses into space, well, the nuke he tosses into space, I should say, it ends up striking the floating, wibbly-wobbly pane that is the Phantom Zone that contains Non-Ursa and General Zod, freeing them and stranding them on the moon, which is how Superman 2 begins, obviously. It was an obvious sequel hook. It was meant to tell people explicitly, guess what? There's going to be another chapter. It's the kind of thing that Marvel does all the time now with the codas after their movies. I liked it. I liked it considering where the studio was going, and I think that actually, if they had kept Donner on as a director and let him make the movie as he envisioned it, quite frankly, I think Superman 2 would have had an even bigger buzz surrounding it than it did, just because of the way that ended, because you just didn't see sequel baiting quite like that most of the time. At that time, usually, you would have movies that would be eventually developed into franchises, but you wouldn't see that kind of cliffhanger typically. I mean, Star Wars was obviously an exception, kind of, sort of, especially when you're talking about Empire and the Jedi. But it might have seemed disjointed, but I think that the way it was shot, the way it was paced, and the way it went straight in to Jor-El fighting for his theory that Krypton was about to explode, I think it was plenty intriguing, and I think it did a fine job of actually hinting at the audience, hey, stay tuned. This is important. We are coming back to this. Please believe we are definitely coming back to this point. And so it may seem a bit odd to start it off that way, but quite honestly, I was fine with it. I think in the grander scope of particularly the way it works, if you watch Superman and then you watch Superman 2, the Richard Donner cut right back to back, it flows just fine. So, I mean, that's my take on it. I of all the things that I had issues with when it comes to the Superman franchise in terms of the way it was developed from Superman up to Superman Returns, that's one part with which I take no issue whatsoever. Also, because, in my opinion, I've come to realize after rewatching these movies, Terrence Stamp deserves this place as one of the greatest on-screen superhero villains ever cast, period. And I'm going to get a lot more into that when we get to Superman 2. But, I mean, if you haven't watched these yet, and you go back and watch them, God help me, if Zod ends up being DLC in Injustice Gods Among Us, which I won't cite my sources, but I've heard rumors that he is going to be, I really, really am hoping that somebody had the sense to model him on the way Terrence Stamp portrayed him.
Well, interesting you bring up Terrence Stamp versus the way Michael Shannon plays him, because I'll tell you what, Terrence Stamp is one of the very, very few super villains I've ever seen like underplay the role, and that's not a negative. He brings a steady, menacing calm to it that you don't see. And just as an aside, I watched Oz the Great and Powerful last night. That has got to be one of the worst movies I've seen in a long time. But what makes it even worse is Mila Kunis's overacting. And Mila Kunis's overacting is really a classic example of how a mediocre actor can sometimes, great actors can pull off overacting and chew scenery, and like we talked about this with the Batman movies and Jack Nicholson. You can go over the top and it still be fun to watch, or you can be Mila Kunis as the Wicked Witch of the West and completely fuck up a movie. I mean, she had help. The whole movie stinks, but Terrence Stamp is the exact opposite of that, where there's a menace to Zod in just a cold stare. But yeah, I do want to get to that. Robert Winfree.
Yeah.
There's if you go back and watch movies of that time period, as I said, this is before CGI, and this is before movies were overladen with special effects. This is a period in film where now this may come as a shock to some of you younger viewers. Actors had to act, and directors kept cameras still, so you got a feel for what was happening in the setting. That being said, yes, this is before Cloverfield. That being said, just give me some of your impressions of how that whole opening sequence was handled in terms of it's almost black and white. They kept very monochrome color features. The cameras kept very, very still. Marlon Brando just sort of is front and center through almost that entire sequence. I don't know. You and Robert are younger, substantially younger than I am. I'm curious to see if watching that, if that still holds up for you, or do you like, oh, Jesus Christ, I wish this was punched up a little bit more.
I tend to have more of a, I tend to have more of an old school sensibility when it comes to that type of pacing and that type of camera work. I don't like overly shaky camera work. I don't like fast cuts all that much. I mean, they serve their purpose, and when used well, they add a great deal. For something like this, to be a bit slower, to be a bit, let something develop, let the actors act. Don't try and hide what they're doing with, CGI or camera cuts or overly edited sequences. It's necessary for this. It's also probably in Brando's contract that nothing shall be on the screen that detracts from Brando. I'm being quasi-facetious there, but at the same time, there's a reason he's as highly regarded as an actor as he is, and in those brief, it's not a very long sequence that he's involved in there, but he brings, you look at him and the way he acts, and I firmly believe this could be a man who knows his world is about to end and no one else is paying attention.
I want to go to you, Robert, and this last question will close out the first little bit of this discussion regarding the film. I want to move into once Kal-El hits the Earth. But it's been brought up many times before that Superman's origin, in as far as Jor-El and Lara not leaving the planet with Kal-El, makes almost no sense. It makes no sense in The Man of Steel. It makes no sense in this movie. As somebody who's read the comic books, I'm not sure how much of a Superman reader you were, but just in terms of the film, I don't know if Brando ever really gives a good enough explanation for why they don't get in the goddamn ship with Kal-El and take off when they have a chance. And I'm curious to see what your reaction to that is.
Give me one second, Mark. I'm going to call back in, just so you're aware.
Okay. Cooper, hit it.
Yeah. Well, before you said anything, I never really gave it much thought. I was like, okay, well, I guess they couldn't fit. But when you think about it, why didn't I was like, oh, they can't fit. And I thought, why don't the dumbasses just build one big enough for all of them? I mean, maybe they didn't have the power source or something. I don't know. But it really doesn't make much sense. I mean, I guess the reason they rocketed him off to Earth by himself is because Jor-El assumed that he would become a force for the greater good and that Earth was a good planet and he'd be raised by good people with good morals, and he'd become a really, a good person. But as the Elseworld story, Red Son, has anybody read Red Son? Anybody?
Well, what Red Son is, for people who haven't read it, is he lands in communist Russia. But to make your point for you, Superman could have landed in Harlem, in Detroit. He could have landed in a crack house. He happened to have landed on a nice farm in Kansas, as opposed to like a rapey farm, in Forrest Gump somewhere.
A drug mule facility. Oh boy!
Boy, Jor-El really spun the wheel there, didn't he?
He really did. I mean, he took a huge shot. He was pretty much taking like a sniper shot from 500,000 yards away, and was hoping and praying he hit something. And say he got lucky.
Man, crackhead.
Could you imagine? I want someone to do that now. What if Superman landed in a crack house?
What if he landed in the Assassin's Guild with Bane?
Could you imagine that? Bane as a child in the prison, running around with a teddy bear, all manner of horror happening to him, and suddenly fucking Kal-El lands there and starts destroying things because he's a child. Imagine what we're going to be feeling.
You know what, Robert, you're a big RDA fan, so here's a reference I just know you're going to get. And lo, there was much fanfic.
Well, let's just be happy he didn't land in, no offense, Mark, let's be happy he didn't land in Florida, since RDA.
He could have been one of the Wyatt family, come on.
Jesus.
So back on track.
He would take a bronze spot on the Heat, and they would be up about 16 or 17 NBA titles by now.
I mean,
didn't Charles Manson work on... Didn't Charlie Manson, do stuff with farms? He could have been one of the Manson family.
So, Coop, your explanation for why Jor-El doesn't get in the goddamn ship. Go.
Well, my explanation, I guess I gave it. I assumed that he entrusted the goodness of Earthlings to raise his son right. But logically speaking, he really was being kind of a dumbass. For a man who was so intelligent as to predict the imminent demise of his planet and come with the forethought of, hey, I'm going to rocket ship my kid off to Narnia.
No, I got a different, a little more of an altruistic theory as to that, actually. The one that I've always kind of gone with, and maybe this is the kind of thing wherein how you perceive this kind of says something about your values, about what you hold dear. So, I mean, read into this what you will about me. I always kind of suppose that maybe the reason why they didn't jump in the ship themselves and try to get away was maybe that, number one, there was this idea of, we've lived long lives. We basically lived our lives. It's not really all that important that we go on. And second, and more importantly tied to that, is the idea of perhaps we are going to try to make our son a legacy to carry on our vision for good beyond Krypton throughout whatever world it is that he lands on. And you know, that is going to be our dying legacy, is leaving this next planet that guiding light, and in the meantime, we're going to stay behind here, and we're going to try to fight this thing, to try to fight Krypton's destruction until the very bitter end, you know, until our last breath.
I think that's why I think that's why the scene is. Hang on, guys. I think that's why the scene is muddled for me. One, the point that I'm trying to get across is I don't think Donner does a lot of really, really good things in this first movie, short of the very end of it. But I really hate how they end the movie. But Donner does a lot of things really, really, really well. This is almost a perfect movie, save a few flaws. But one of those flaws is the fact that they don't make. I mean, the thing with a movie is, and I'm going to take a line here from the folks at Red Letter Media, I don't fucking care about the comic book, and I don't care about books, and I don't care about video games, or whatever the source material is. The movie must make sense within the movie. You can quibble after the fact, but at least while you're watching this thing's got to make sense. And if I'm watching this and I have no preconceived notion of what a Superman is, I have no idea why Jor-El did what he just did. It's not clear in the movie. But I will say this to your point, Sean. I said something like that last night with Harris when we were discussing Man of Steel. I said there's an element of penance going on with Jor-El. Now, that's my interpretation, though, and they do a better job of that in Man of Steel than they do in the original Superman movie. But again, it's also left a lot up for the viewer to kind of come up with this. And in film, you're supposed to show me, not necessarily leave it so ethereal for me to just interpret. Go ahead, Sean.
But you didn't let me finish my point, though. The rest of the point is also the fact that perhaps maybe there was the thinking that, okay, if we're going to go down trying to save our planet, you know, at the very least we don't want to sacrifice our son who has a whole lifetime in front of him while we're doing it. We don't want him to be a martyr for a sacrifice for our bravery. Now, the other thing you got to remember, too, is that a lot of people throughout the years have looked at this and perceived the very obvious archetypal Christ-like figure scenery or imagery and symbolism that kind of runs throughout the movie. And this idea that if you're to view it that way, you're supposed to see Jor-El as being the kind of all-knowing God figure above who in all his wisdom sends his only begotten son to a pretty harsh world of people who have a lot of potential for good in them, and kind of asks that he just be kind of a beacon, kind of a model for them, and to try to kind of teach them as much of his wisdom as they possibly can. Now, whether or not you perceive that, whether or not you choose to even be offended by the very idea that I would bring that up, which, if you are, behold the many fucks that I give, because I care about. I don't think you.
I don't see any fucks.
But anyway, that's just one of the themes that a lot of people have kind of perceived through the years about it. And I think there's maybe a little bit of validity to it, and even Richard Donner himself, in interviews where he's been asked about it, has always kind of laughed it off and smirked a little bit and said, well, I'm not going to say yes, but I'm not going to say no. And you also got to remember, this was a script written by Mario Puzo, who himself was very, very Catholic, and also that if you're to go by the original origin story and go back that far, well, you know, Jerry Siegel was basically a New York Jew. So, I mean, there are a lot of possible reasons to look at that and kind of see the very obvious but very sincere symbolism in that.
Sure, and that's all fair and valid, but that's interpretation that isn't shown in the movie.
Right, but I mean, it's maybe not shown as best it could be, and that's one thing that could be a little bit better about it. But I mean, let's turn the page here and let's know. So Superman has gone to Earth. He is raised by the Kents, and they don't spend a tremendous amount of time focusing on his having to struggle with his own powers and his place in the universe. They show a little bit of it, of how he's sort of dealing with things in Smallville, but no sooner than you get a sense of he's having to hold back because he doesn't want to appear, he doesn't want to freak people out. His father dies shortly, there's a beat. Shortly thereafter that, he goes into the north, where he finds Jor-El in the crystal and all of that. And in the extended cut, which if you haven't watched the extended Superman the movie, you really should, because in the theatrical cut, it's a very harsh cut from when he shows up and sees Jor-El to him going to Metropolis. In the extended cut, there's this really long sequence, because he shows up there, he's like 1920, so 2023, somewhere in there, and like 10 years goes by that he's up in the north, where Jor-El is sort of laying out the foundation of who he is and what he's supposed to be, and he's telling him about Krypton, and he's tutoring him, basically. This is sort of Superman in the college years, and it takes place over about a decade. And then there's the cut of him in the suit and, flying out of the north, out of the Fortress of Solitude, as it were, and boom, you're in Metropolis. It's a so
much...
you're in fact saying he's standing on the edge of tomorrow.
Sure. But I really, it's again one of those things where if you've got patience and you like old film, it's an interesting sequence because all it is a one shot of space and Marlon Brando narrating. But like Marlon Brando narrating is more interesting than giant fighting robots in a Michael Bay film, in my opinion. He's just fascinating to listen to. I don't know though if young kids could really get it today, but who knows. But what I want to get to, and I want to get our villains host, Mr. Robert Winfree, I want to get his opinion on this. Now, most of this movie is, just trying to introduce Superman to the world. His villain in the movie, his nemesis, is Lex Luthor, played by Gene Hackman, and Gene Hackman's motivation is land. And
gold.
Yes. He wants to create a giant earthquake. That way, the land that he owns that is currently worthless will then be worth something, and he'll be a millionaire. What does God need with a starship? That's my question. But my question to you, Robert Winfree, is that did you feel like Lex Luthor and all of the things and obstacles that he throws at Superman was sufficient? In the hero's arc, does Lex Luthor as the villain pose enough of a compelling threat to Christopher Reeve's Superman, in your opinion?
Absolutely. And a lot of that has to do with, a lot of credit needs to be given to the screenwriter. You mentioned Mario Puzo wrote it. I know there were some other people involved a little bit, because they were able to impart the essence of Lex Luthor into the screen character, which was a huge problem with Superman Returns. I know you don't want to get into it a whole lot, but Pat Mullen and I discussed why Kevin Spacey's version failed, and it's not because of Kevin Spacey's acting, it's because they wrote Lex Luthor as kind of a manic. He goes from being quiet and menacing to being grandiose and over the top and yelling at people, and there's no in-between. You kind of snap your fingers and his mood switches from one to the other at the drop of a hat. And thankfully, they were able to kind of capture Luthor in this screen, and thank heavens they had Gene Hackman, because he was perfect. He was perfect as Lex Luthor. Okay, who's laughing at me?
Not me.
I'm sorry, hang on, I'm going to take it through, too.
As you were saying, sir.
But, well, one of the important things about this one is that Lex Luthor's plan is in motion before before he knows about Superman. So you can't have... It wouldn't have made sense if this was Lex Luthor plotting to kill Superman, because he didn't know about Superman. Nobody did until his plan's ready to go. And there's a couple of things about Luthor that kind of let you know why he's a serious player. One, first of all, his lair is... I like his lair. It's hard to get to, but it's still very much grandiose within. It's Lex surrounding himself with things that he would like. He rather callously kills a couple of policemen who are trying to follow his little henchmen back to his base. He lets them get hit by the train.
By the way, I have to talk about Otis's theme really quick. Every time you see Otis, and then eventually this morphs into Lex Luthor theme, which doesn't make any sense to me, because Otis's theme is dum dum do 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 do, and there's Jawas and droids and shit. You know, it's very Humpty Dumpty. You know, which is great because that's kind of Otis's character. He's Humpty Dumpty the henchman. Later on in films, it continues to be Otis leaves and there's just Lex Luthor, and that's still his theme. So here you have this guy humming Mozart and, you know, coming up with these grandiose plans, and in the background, doom, doom, do 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 do, itchy, wow, wow, wow. You know, like, what are you doing?
It makes him sound like a dumbass.
Oh, that baby, why?
It's kind of sad because you could use those same musical intervals to create a different feeling if you wanted to stick with those same intervals to be kind of the bad guy's theme. You could have added different qualities to it to make it a bit more menacing, to enhance the Luthor character. And his plan, to be fair, is pretty smart. He has bought up all of this useless land in kind of the middle of California that's it's just desert, and his plan is to blow up the San Andreas Fault, cause a massive earthquake, Los Angeles, San Francisco, all that will then sink into the ocean, and all of this previously useless and worthless desert land is now beachfront property that he owns. And, you know, that makes sense. I mean, you know, it's a good plan. It's something that will work. I mean, it did work more or less. And then Superman arrives, and he doesn't get freaked out about it. I mean, his line is, you know, it can't possibly be coincidence that the greatest pillar of justice ever known has arrived just as I, Lex Luthor, the world's greatest criminal mastermind, is about to enact his greatest plan. He, you know, learns about Kryptonite, he locates some, he sets up a plot to trap Superman. He would have drowned Superman rather easily. You know, it's really kind of the perfect introduction for Lex Luthor, and it could have set up so much more for the character than it wound up being, but that's because of studio executives and how the rest of that played out. But Luthor, this was a great introduction for Luthor. He was a great villain. He had the grandiose sense that Luthor needs, but he still had the kind of callous menace that goes along with that character. I mean, he launched an extra nuclear warhead at a completely innocent city just because he knew Superman couldn't stop both of them at the same time. It's really the perfect introduction for that villain as far as this movie is concerned.
So you were satisfied then with the amount of obstacles he sets up for Superman. You feel like Superman had some serious threats to overcome and was tested, and it wasn't just, you know, Superman doing stuff.
Well, I mean, and you know, this is where, you know, it gets kind of murky depending on, because of, you know, they wound up using the he turns back time to save Lois thing in this one.
Oh, I want to get to that separately. I have got a lot.
I know you do. I know you do, and there's plenty of bad to go along with that. But at the same time, he made the choice to intercept the other missile and, you know, and sacrifice Lois Lane. And I know, depending on which ending version you go with, it gets different than that. But at the same time, that's not something, you know, he didn't go into that thinking, okay, I can stop this one and then reverse time and everything will be okay again. He had to make that conscious choice. Luthor placed him in a position to where he had to question and deal with his own morality, not necessarily just something he could physically overcome, which is the hallmark of the great Superman villains is you can't just oppose Superman with force. You have to kind of oppose him with, you make him question himself. You make him make tough choices. You don't just throw a giant robot at him.
And we'll get to that giant robot in another hour or so. Sean and Robert Cooper, I want to go over to you and just talk a little bit about something that Robert brought up, and that is, Luthor sets up this trap, basically. I don't know if I would call it elaborate, but he sets up a trap. And Robert made a very salient point. Going force to force with a god on Earth is probably a bad idea, one which you're going to lose until Doomsday shows up. So instead, he beats them with the weapon that he has on hand, which is his intellect. Now, it's a great scene. Superman confronts him, and he's kind of bullying him around a little bit, and not expecting him to pull out the one dagger that can kill him, and he does. He pulls out a piece of kryptonite on a chain, and of course now Superman's never been confronted like this before, so he freaks out a little bit, and Luthor sort of jumps at him, puts the chain around his neck, and now he's dying, and he kicks him in the pool, and for all intents and purposes, he's a dead man. Here's my problem, and this is what I want you guys to talk to me about for a second. I want to get your thoughts on this. We want to see the hero overcome things, and to some degree, it's okay to call upon your sidekicks and helpers and friends and assorted others to help you overcome these obstacles, especially if there's a particular character flaw that is being corrected in that sequence. Essentially, what happens here is Luthor's trusted henchman turns on him for no good reason other than guilt, and she wants Superman to save her mother. I guess that's strong enough for that particular character, but I don't know how much that does for me in terms of Superman's character. In any case, she basically bribes him and says, or manipulates him rather, and says, "If you save my mother, I'll save you." I thought it was weak. Your thoughts? I'll go to Sean and then Robert Cooper.
Okay, first off, Gene Hackman was perfect as Lex Luthor.
For this version, as far as this interpretation goes, I mean, is Gene Hackman assuming the next Man of Steel movie has Luthor, do I want Gene Hackman or someone who does what Gene Hackman did in this movie? No, I don't. For this version of Superman, for the interpretation that they went with, I thought he did an exceptional job.
The next Luthor will end up being Jamie Foxx. Go ahead, Sean.
Oh, shut up.
Jamie Foxx.
I will find you.
I have now put that into the universe. Deal with it.
Should be Tom Hardy.
Wait, hang on. Before Sean continues, if you're going to say that, you have to now do the impression.
Hello there, Superman. How are you?
You're telling me that I have to do the impression, as in I have to do that instead of the Dr. Cox wrong song?
No. I wanted Cooper to do Bane again, only Bane is Lex Luthor.
I will kill you, Superman, for I am the city's reckoning. You can continue. I'll stop.
Okay, Sean. When we last left Sean Comer, our hero, he was questioning Robert Winfree's decision to say Gene Hackman was an adequate Lex Luthor, and he was going to talk about the silly scene where the woman saves him. Go.
Oh, God. You know what? Don't get me wrong. I like Gene Hackman. I love Gene Hackman. I think he's got the reputation he does as an actor for a good reason. But sometimes even the best actors are just not fit for certain roles. And quite frankly, I never really was that invested in hating Lex Luthor, in large part because of how Hackman played him. It was, God, I hesitate to call it over the top, but it was kind of just hammy enough to annoy me, and for me to never really feel with few exceptions, like he was ever really a threat to Superman in almost any way. I mean, it was almost like watching Lex Luthor as if Lex Luthor had been written into an episode of the Sherwood Schwartz Batman series. Which, I guess this movie was a little bit lighter in tone, so I guess it works, but to be perfectly honest with you, my two favorite people to ever play Lex Luthor, I actually thought Kevin Spacey's performance was outstanding, despite him being given lousy material to work with. In fact, to be honest with you, I really would not object if they maybe wanted him to come back and play Lex Luthor in the sequel, or in the sequel to Man of Steel, if they decide to incorporate Luthor into that. I would, in fact, be all for that.
I would, too. I mean, I'm not saying... I never said Spacey did a very good job when the script that he was given allowed him to actually play Luthor. The problem was Luthor was written so poorly that, I mean, because I mentioned this on the Villains podcast when we talked about Superman villains. Kevin Spacey plays great villains, and right. He could even, and he's, I mean, if you wanted, you saw it when he did the one I kind of think about when I think about Luthor in a way.
The Alien in K-Pax?
His portrayal of. No, his Archibald Northcutt from Fred Claus.
What? Yeah.
Don't tempt me. I can go bad movies too.
Well,
his portrayal of John Doe in Seven. You get that kind of quiet menace that he can bring, and it works very well. The problem with that was he was written so poorly. But if they want to bring Spacey back as Luthor, yeah, I'd say go for it. He is a very capable actor and very capable of portraying Lex Luthor.
And that's the thing, though, and that's the thing about Spacey where I give him an advantage over Gene Hackman, is the fact that Spacey played him calculating and Machiavellian. As you guys pointed out, somebody who knows that he can't go head-to-head, toe-to-toe, punch-for-punch with Superman in a fight, but he knows he can outmaneuver him intellectually. That was never an impression that I got from Gene Hackman watching this movie. I never got that impression that he was convincingly that much an equal strategically to Superman was, as Luthor kind of is in the comics. I mean, Superman usually finds a way to right things, but in a number of instances, he at least momentarily gets an advantage because he's just thinking that much further ahead. And actually, other than Spacey, there is one guy who, in a Superman medium with about the same tone as this movie, I think actually also did a great job. Albeit it's unfortunate that he only ever got a chance to voice Lex Luthor. And you guys are going to think I'm crazy for saying this, but it's James Marsters. I thought that actually, and don't get me wrong, I hated the DC Animated Universe Superman Doomsday. I think it took one of the greatest, most compelling. That took one of the greatest, most compelling arcs in the history of the comics, and reduced it to a shameful shell of itself, with all the liberties that it took with the story, just to cram it into a 90-minute time frame. One of the only good things about it, though, was the way Marsters played Luthor. I thought it was absolutely letter perfect. And quite frankly, I realized again that they were working with the talent that they had back then. And, as far as I know, James Marsters probably was not yet a twinkle in his mommy and daddy's eye. But, I got to believe there had to have been somebody out there who could have played it some way differently than how Hackman did. Because the impression I got with Hackman was maybe almost that with the plot being able to maybe get the better of Superman for a little bit, more like it was because Hackman got lucky, and not necessarily because he was really because he really outsmarted anybody. It was kind of like he was Matt Serra and Superman was GSP.
Real quick, Sean, it's a funny joke, and I'm gonna use that as a quick break in here. In Hackman's defense, and in the writing of that character's defense, he keeps referring to himself as the greatest criminal in our age, or whatever the line is, criminal mastermind of our age. But ultimately,
with a God line.
Ultimately, he's a mogul and a murderer. That's all he is. Superman, the inclusion of Superman in his life forces him to be something different than he ever intended to be. Because, if you look at what his initial plan was, he was going to kill lots of people and blow up lots of land in order to make millions of dollars. Okay, so it makes him a murderer, and it makes him an asshole, but I think that's all Gene Hackman needed to bring to the character. The idea that he has to be Lex Luthor, super bad guy, is only because this god showed up and made him be that. But he isn't. But he doesn't have to be that way instantaneously, and it wouldn't make any sense for him to be that way at the start of the movie.
But he never was that way. He never developed into that. He's just. And I'm sorry, that greatest criminal mastermind. I'm sorry, that is one of the fucking corniest goddamn things. It's too obvious. Again, it is too Silver Age. And I realize we're more or less watching a Silver Age Superman movie. Yeah, I get that. But goddamn, guys, that would sound stupid even in a Silver Age book. And what like that does sound stupid in a Silver Age book. So it's a product of its time, but it's not a product that has aged very well. And all you need to do to see that they were capable of something a little more subtle, a little bit darker, is watch the next movie.
Yes, but I still want to stick with this point. Like I said, he bested him rather easily, and Superman, for all intents and purposes, should have died in that pool. And he's saved by dumb luck and an even dumber girl. Cooper, what do you make of it?
Well, I was actually kind of annoyed because I had totally forgot about that little plot thread because it's been forever since I've seen the first two Superman movies. I was like, okay, I kind of remember this chain, and I'm like, wait, Lex Luthor just shot a missile to some bumfuck Egypt of a New Jersey town, and that was how Superman got saved. I'm like, it just didn't make any sense. Like, just to me, just that point alone.
How fucking Hackensack be? Billy Joel referenced it.
It's in New Jersey. It would be better off if it was a nuclear wasteland. Let's just put it out there.
It's cool, though.
So, Superman is saved by a girl. Let's move on, Cooper. Superman saved by a girl.
I just thought it was kind of I didn't like that resolution to it. Like, I guess to the opposite, I know we keep bringing up Superman Returns and we shouldn't be bringing up Superman Returns, but in that one, he was like on a freaking Kryptonite island or something, wasn't he? And he lifted the whole damn thing up with the power of the sun, and that was too much. I didn't believe that he could be able to do that. Now, on the other side, I believe that he could probably pick up Mr. T's pimp chain of Kryptonite. I mean, I don't know quite how heavy it was, but I was like, really, dude? I mean, I know it's kind of sort of like trying to stab you in the heart, but you can try. But then I guess the girl came and saved him, and that was your resolution to that problem. I guess on Sean's point, Lex did kind of pretty much trump Superman with dumb luck, and he would have won. But I guess Superman had to beat Lex through dumb luck, too. Everybody just had a little dumb luck in this movie.
Yeah, I think that's there's a lot, like I said, that I love about, and you wouldn't know it listening to this podcast, but there's a lot about the original movie that I really do love and treasure about Superman, the original movie. But that whole sequence to this day, I remember being a child and watching it and going, wait a minute. First of all, how is she not then shot in the next scene by Lex Luthor? And what's even funnier is she shows up in the second movie. So it's like, you're writing, as a screenwriter, as you're writing this going, okay, the henchman girl is going to betray the villain and not face any consequences whatsoever. All you hear is him going, Miss Tessbacher! And then nothing. Did she die? Was she shot? Did he pimp slap her? What did he do? So, I thought that was
dumb.
It really is.
Come on,
it was one of the examples in the movie of lazy writing, in my opinion.
And Lex Luthor, you want to build him up to be, I guess, something menacing, I guess, for your second movie. You can have him frickin' shoot the betraying henchman. You can find others, I'm sure.
I want to talk about the horrible ending to that movie. But in order to do that, I think we need to discuss some of the performances. So let's just quick run through these. Margot Kidder as Lois Lane. We were talking last night. I jokingly said to some of the people that I work with today, I said, pop quiz, who made the best Lois Lane, Boswick, Amy Adams, or Margot Kidder? And we were gotten to talking about it a little bit, and I said, my problem, I think Margot Kidder gets closest to nailing Lois Lane in terms of what the character is supposed to be. The problem with this particular Lois Lane is she's too much damsel in distress. She's too obsessed with Superman. Whereas, I don't want to, again, spoil too much of Man of Steel, but I have a lot of positive things to say about Amy Adams, so go listen to the podcast. But here's my issue with Margot Kidder. I think she nails the performance spot on. Unfortunately, she's written as a do-nothing. In 2 movies, she accomplishes one major feat that has nothing to do with, trying to unmask Superman, and that is she punches Ursula in the face. No. Oh. That's not a feat. She punches Ursula. No, seriously, she punches Ursula in the face. That's all she manages to accomplish. She doesn't solve any problems. She's not an aid to Superman in any way, and in many ways she's a hindrance. She's almost an albatross in the second movie. I feel like she's not written well in terms of stuff to do in this movie, which is unfortunate because the performance otherwise is really spot on. Cooper, I'm going to go to you first, and then to Winfree, and then to Sean regarding this Lois Lane and Robert Cooper. And if you guys want to bring up anybody else left in the movie that we haven't talked about, Perry, Jimmy Olsen, who's a little too gee whiz beaver for me, be my guest. Go ahead, Coop.
Well, I don't think I can add really much more on Lois Lane. I do feel like that Margot Kidder pretty much did. She did a damn good job with what she was given. It's just what she was given is really something. I guess now, I don't know about the 70s. I wasn't around during the 70s. If I was not aware. Were we really much into progressive women then? You're going to actually have to answer that question. Yes,
Robert. In the 70s, women did stuff. They voted in everything.
Oh, really? They got that? Damn.
Yes, sir.
They didn't tell me that in history class. But, yeah, I really felt that she was, as you said, she was really a hindrance. She really didn't add much more. Hell, she even made the ending. If she wouldn't have, been around, the ending would have been fine. But, yeah, she really just didn't do anything of note. She punched Ursula. Woohoo. Hell, I could have punched Ursula. Where's my hero cookie? Yeah. Okay,
Winfree, your thoughts on the issues that I brought up with Margot Kidder's performance and what was written for her. You want to add anything to that? Do you disagree?
Not really. They were able to touch on some of the things that made Lois Lane an interesting character. They just, for whatever reason, were unable to really expound on them or commit to them. And it's a real shame because, like you said, those elements where she's being a reporter, where she's being a problem solver in the capacity that they let her be, she can be quite compelling. She can be interesting, and then to just not commit to actually writing her as an interesting character was just it almost felt in some senses like, well, we can't have Superman without Lois Lane, so here she gets to be the woman who gets saved all the time by Superman. And it's a real shame because there is so much more that you could have done with that legitimately, and that they just kind of threw by the wayside for one reason or another.
They made it very much like this is the Superman movie, and Superman because Superman, so we're going to Superman. And he's awfully Smurfy. It's really, in that sense, it's very frustrating that they didn't take a step back and go, hey, there's other characters here. They're people too, which will get corrected in another movie, but that's a different podcast. Sean, I want you to talk about Lois Lane, but I also want you to consider this. I don't know, other than sort of a reverse Florence Nightingale thing where, you know, Superman constantly saves her, so she falls in love with him due to post-traumatic stress disorder. I don't know why she's in love with this guy.
PTSD, obviously.
There's nothing. Well, if you fall out of a fucking helicopter and God saves you, you would be quite thankful, possibly in love too, or at least you'd think you were. But
I wouldn't grab his nut.
Shut up, you. Other than that, I don't know why she's in love with him, other than plot said so.
Oh, you pretty much summed it up. It always goes back to the old thing that many a comic geek has brought up is, hey, what in the world is Superman doing with Lois Lane when he could be doing the super humpity-bumpity with Wonder Woman?
Yeah.
So, but a little interesting trivia about Lois in this movie, actually. First off, since we've already mentioned the extended cut of Superman the movie, do indeed go watch it, because it's just a matter of about a minute or so. But there's an alternate version, an extended version of the scene where Clark is running with the train that makes a very funny little reveal. Everybody sees that scene.
The girl on the train is Lois Lane?
Well, I was trying to get to that, but thank you, fucko. Yes.
And welcome to his new podcast, Everybody Loves Fucko. Continue.
It turns out that the little girl on the train pointed out the window, "No, there's a man." I forget what the damn line is. And it's, "Oh, Lois Lane." And, yeah, so... Yeah, I did get kind of a good little chuckle out of that. That was an interesting little bit of humor. But the other little bit of trivia, and I swear if you interrupt me this time on this one, Margot Kidder was actually...
Wait. I don't want to interrupt you, but can I guess at it?
No, just let me have this.
I'm going to let
All right.
During the casting process, Margot Kidder was actually up against about 5 other actresses. And one of them actually I thought might have brought something else to the role. This is what I want to get to. She was up against Ann Archer, Susan Blakely, Leslie Ann Warren, Deborah Raffin, but ultimately it came down to screen tests between Kidder and the woman she beat out. And ultimately Kidder was chosen, but later in 1978, the actress she beat out also ended up being in another movie that makes me kind of curious how she would have done in this one, and that is she was up against Stockard Channing, who went on to play Rizzo in Grease. And, you know, granted, they're obviously very different characters, but you guys just talked at length about how Kidder is very much nothing but a damsel in distress. You know, she's pretty much there to give Superman somebody to save, and that's really about it. Whereas elsewhere in the way the source material has been portrayed, she's been portrayed as being a little more hard-nosed, a little bit more feisty. You know, Channing, I think, demonstrated that she could do that she could really pull that off. And so I know, you know, you're not supposed to look back and say, what if, well, things turned out how they did, and they turned out for the best, and so on and so forth. In this case, I don't know. Stockard Channing as Lois Lane, I thought might have brought a little bit more of that bite to the performance, even if you can't really change the script. As it stands, you know, Margot Kidder as Lois, I really have no opinion. I really have no opinion whatsoever, just because there's nothing there in the movie to give me an opinion. She's working with what she's given, but nothing really gives me any kind of investment in the character the way other female romantic interests in other superhero movies down the line would. I've said it late before that I'm not a big Kirsten Dunst fan, and I'm not. But at least there was a sense of some investment in the character one way or another there. I could say the same thing for Emma Stone in The Amazing Spider-Man. Not as good a movie, obviously, but I found myself a lot more engaged with her as Gwen Stacy than I was with Margot Kidder as Lois Lane. Considering that she's one of the leads in the movie, that's not a good thing. That's not a good thing in terms of how it was written, and it's not a good thing in terms of, I think, what Kidder really brought to the role. And she's remembered for it because really she's done kind of, well, fuck all else of any major note, except for going crazy and running around naked, toothless in somebody's backyard. God, of course, I don't know if any of that ended up on film, so I can't say if that really tops Superman. But, you know, she looked the part just fine, but I just can't really keep the nostalgia goggles on and say, oh yeah, she was absolutely outstanding, letter perfect. No, looked the part, but not much of a performance from not much of a script written for her. So,
why is she in love with Superman in this movie?
God only knows. I can't really figure that out either. That's the other thing that's really flimsy about it, is the fact that, like I said before, it's more or less a Silver Age movie, and in the Silver Age, this stuff wasn't really thought through that clearly.
Well, that then brings me to the conclusion of this movie. If someone remembers how this movie was supposed to have ended, feel free to chime in once I tell you how it actually ends. But let me say this. The initial writing of Parts 1 and Part 2 of the Superman Donner epic is supposed to end after Zod and Kal-El have destroyed most of Metropolis in their fight. And all of these terrible things have happened, and so in order to right the wrongs and set things straight, and not to mention protect his identity against the eternally nosy Lois Lane, he does circles around the Earth, reverses time, and voila, problem solved, and Zod goes back to the Phantom Zone. Okay. Had that actually played out that way, it would have annoyed me less. It still would have annoyed me because I think it's a cheap way to end the movie, but as Sean just said, I don't think people think some of these things through, and I probably would have been able to live with it had that been the ending of 2. They unfortunately there were some problems while filming 2 at the same time as 1. They were trying to get 1 out by a certain time, and they had already shot that ending, so they just said, fuck it, we're going to make that the ending of the first movie. And what leads up to it is this. Yes, female henchman, Miss Tessmacher, has freed Superman from his watery doom, and after saying, go save my mother in Hackensack, New Jersey, which he does. So he goes to Jersey, and he gets the missile, and he sends it up into space, and he blows it up. Okay, great. Well, there's another missile that actually hit the San Andreas. I think it does hit San Andreas. And Superman dives into the Earth, and he stops the platelets from splitting, and he stops the earthquake. Unfortunately, that still causes all kinds of other havoc, so he's running around the West Coast saving buses and people and everything. Meanwhile, Lois Lane is trapped beneath a rock slide, and she is buried alive. And Superman, she's the last one on the list to be saved, and unfortunately, he gets there too late. And I guess in this alternate universe, no one knows anything about mouth-to-mouth resuscitation. Apparently, once you stop breathing, that's it. You can never be brought back to life again, unless you reverse time. And that's exactly what he does. He saves her from the car, but she's dead at this point, having been buried alive, and he screams no, and no, I can't believe it. The love of my life has been buried alive, and I wasn't strong enough to stop it. Dearie me. At which point he just, it's set up earlier in the movie, like, how fast can you fly? I don't know. I've never tried. I've never timed myself. Ha ha! Foreshadowing. So he flies around the Earth faster than he's ever flown before, and he reverses time. And then everything goes back to the way it was. And Lois Lane is saved. Now, I have so many problems with this. Because here's the thing. If you take away the consequences of people's actions in movies, then you've now wasted my time throughout this motion picture. If you take away consequences, if you take away, if you take out the stakes in the narrative, then what was the point of all of this? This becomes, what was a film with a lot of heft an emotional substance then becomes a giant exercise in masturbation, which is exactly what this unfortunately turns into because of this cockamamie ending. Anyone want to argue against that point? Winfree, go ahead.
No, I'm not going to argue against that point too hard. I mean, you're absolutely right about as far as if you make everything that's happened before it irrelevant, then the whole thing, then, what's the point? I get that a lot in when I was a teenager and I would read, multi-part, like, young adult horror fiction where, you get to the book like 7 or 8 and it's the final one and you're actually invested and you're kind of interested in the story, and then time travel, they avert the entire series from ever happening, and you just kind of left like, well, fuck you too. I mean, that's kind of my response to that when it happens, and it annoys me when it happens in books. It annoys me when it happens in movies, unless, of course, the entire movie is about that, about, I'm a bit more lenient if it's a time travel movie, and so you're trying to work around things. But again, then the point becomes the journey to alter things, not I'm trying to do other. I'm not, I've gone through this entire thing, but just because I feel like it now, it never happened, and now it doesn't matter, and that annoys me to death. And the one saving grace, I feel at least, for that entire sequence is the fact that Christopher Reeve is able to actually somewhat. He's able to make you feel kind of how Superman feels at that moment. He's able to emote and able to connect with you. But that's about it. The rest of it, I just, no, you could have done stuff that was so much better.
Mr. Cooper, does that ending completely shoot to shit the rest of the movie?
It kind of, sort of does take that nice birthday cake that was being made, and then it just takes a total doo-doo dump on that whole birthday cake. I was enjoying the movie, and I was like, okay, I've had my problems here or there, but overall good movie. And then you get to the ending, and, sometimes if you don't get to the ending of a movie or a TV show, you're missing out on something because, the ending can totally change your perspective. And I feel like that's what this did. It really kind of, it wasn't a ruined movie. It didn't make it the worst movie ever. It just kind of made it to where I was like, that's it. That was kind of dumb. But I do wonder, why didn't he save Lois earlier? I mean, I know there are a ton of other people to save, but he's not going to try to go around the world to save them.
I don't understand why he didn't just resuscitate her. She couldn't have been in the car for that.
Yeah. Well, that too. I'm just wondering, why don't you save her
or
first?
Fly her to the nearest fucking hospital. Hey, she's dead.
Oh, yeah.
Revive her.
Oh, that's a thing. I forgot there was a such thing as police in hospitals in movies.
Could you imagine that? Like, now I'm imagining the scene where he goes supersonic speed with Lois in tow, and he lands at, Tampa General or something, and he's just like, this woman has been buried alive in a car. Save her, sir. You're going to have to sit down and fill this out. Does she have health insurance? I don't know. I'm fucking from Krypton.
Well, sir, you're just going to have to wait in line like the rest of it. I don't care how you landed here.
Then there's like a crackhead who just kind of bumps into him, just like, well, I'm going to see the doctor.
He's on bath salts, tries to eat him.
Superman then gets arrested for beating up somebody in the waiting room.
I'd watch that. Honestly, that ending, that ending would be a lot better than Fuck Physics.
And that's the ending that they wanted to put on Superman 3 or 4, was he gets arrested, and that's how the movie ends to set up the 5 that never happened. Superman on trial for beating a bunch of crackheads to death because they wouldn't get out of his way in line.
Superman goes to jail. He runs into Medea and everything.
Dude, can you imagine the superhero
get out
team
of
up?
here with it. No, Tyler Perry is a blight on society. Mention him not.
Tyler Perry will be Lex Luthor in the next movie.
Oh, piss off.
Jesus.
I have never released that into the
Tyler
universe.
Perry already butchered Alex Cross. There's no reason for him to butcher anything else.
We should get Eddie Murphy to play Lex Luthor.
Okay, have we not demonstrated, folks? Nowadays, people are tapping phones. They're listening. Somewhere,
you know what? If they were listening, then there's Hulk movies in progress after mine and Robert's podcast on the Hulk. I don't think they are listening.
Oh, hey guys.
Well, they're listening. No. They're listening. They're cherry picking the ideas to troll us. You don't know how this works.
No,
I see.
No. Listen to me. You know what? Rant alert time here, folks.
Oh, here you go.
You know, I have seen that some people in this world have a very unique special superpower that they can joke about something completely off the wall, something completely beyond the realm of comprehending that someone might actually do it. And lo and behold, it will happen. Jeremy Lambert and I once reviewed a little movie called Hobo with a Shotgun. You know what? Mid-podcast, I had to go and make the joke. Oh, I'm going to go run for president because instead of hobos with shotguns, I think the real answer is give the homeless katana swords. Nobody's going to fuck with a homeless guy with a samurai sword. 2 months later, 2 damn months, here I am in Mesa, Arizona, walking my way about 4 blocks down the street to Starbucks. What do I happen to walk past? Homeless guy on a bicycle with a goddamn katana dangling off his belt. You know what? Traffic. No, I am not kidding. This is not me being hyperbolic or anything. This is shit that happened. I have also previously watched a TNA pay-per-view, watched a battle royal where they were pulling every wrestler that had not been in a ring on television in years out of their asses to come on there. And finally, I had to go and turn to my buddy, who also happens to be named Jeremy Hulsoff. I said to him, God damn, Jeremy, who's going to be next? D-Ray 3000? 30 seconds later.
D-Ray
3000. You know what? No. Folks, you're joking about it. The NSA are not the only ones who are listening. Somewhere, somebody thinks that is the way to go. Wait a second.
I have only one thing to add to this. I have one thing to... Hang on. We need to talk about Superman 2 and 3 other movies, really. So let me just end this rant by saying the following. Lex Luthor will be played by Tracy Morgan in the next movie.
All right. You know what? Chris Tucker. With my comedic rant mode over, may I get to just one kind of general statement about the ending of Superman, though?
Yes, please.
Okay. To kind of draw things back to the material we're supposed to be talking about here, the thing you have to remember about this ending is this ending actually symbolizes not just everything that bores me about Superman, but everything that for the longest time absolutely bored me to tears about the DC universe in general until I started kind of reading the right stories, so to speak. And that is the fact that Superman is a big blue, red and gold, dull Deus Ex Machina in tights. There is nothing compelling because, as the old saying has always gone, there is no limit to his powers, so anytime someone is written into a corner, or sometimes this is even just, the general modus operandi when it comes to writing a Superman story, okay, well, he has this power, so there we go. Story over, let's pack it in and call it a night. It's not like, arguably, you could make the argument that the people around Superman, the people that Kal-El loves, suffer the least of any friends and loved ones of any other superhero. When you take a look at even within the DC universe, granted you've got the Marvel universe wherein Spider-Man cannot go 5 minutes without reminding us that his Uncle Ben is dead. Daredevil has got arguably one of the most depressing overall existences of any superhero in history. The Fantastic Four constantly. Jean Grey gets killed 3 different times before breakfast in X-Men and manages to resurrect before The View. On the other hand, that's kind of one extreme. But on the other hand, in the Marvel universe, you've got characters who are larger than life, but who have their flaws and their problems too. Like, you've got the egotism of Hal Jordan as the Green Lantern, and that he eventually becomes Parallax. You got the fact that Kyle Rayner kind of has his own share of conflicts in the same role. In almost any given Batman storyline, you've got a constant internal conflict, both about his parents' death and how that still haunts him, but right down to the death of Jason Todd, Batgirl being paralyzed from the waist down, and everything else in his life. In Superman, there's really hardly ever much of a sense that anybody around him is ever in much peril, because it's not unusual in the comics to have shit like what happened at the end of the Superman movie. So in that sense, unfortunately, it kind of keeps with exactly what you expect from Superman. In some way or another, no matter how cheap it might be, I mean, it can be as cheap as a Castlevania death, but you just kind of know to expect it. You kind of know to expect contrivance, right down to when the man actually died.
I'm going to tell you that based on what you just said, I think you're gonna love Man of Steel. Man of Steel is one of the only interpretations of Superman that looks directly at the internal conflicts of Kal-El and not God doing stuff, which is apparently a lot of other interpretations of Superman. So that being said, let's talk about God doing stuff in the second movie. Now, as I said, this is the next part of this discussion is a little tricky to deal with because we're talking about two parallel movies, the theatrical cut and the Donner cut. Let me talk a little bit about the differences between these two, not necessarily scene by scene, plot by plot, but overall, what were some of the thematic problems and the changes in direction. So there was X amount of footage shot for the second movie by Richard Donner, and it kept in the same. Obviously, it kept in the same tone as was set in the first movie, which was supposed to be this was an epic telling of this story. A little dark, a little serious, but ultimately still a fun movie. And and this time they're dealing with Zod coming back for revenge after having escaped the Phantom Zone, and that's so the plot of the movies are still the same. There's a subplot that's the same in both movies, but executed very, very differently, and that is Lois Lane is now obsessed with unmasking Superman, and she believes Clark Kent to be Superman. Gee whiz, I don't know where she would get that from with the glasses and all, but that's where she's going with this, and there's just different scenes executing that very, very differently. And in both movies, you have Superman sort of dealing with the fact that, well, I'm an Earthling. I was raised on Earth. I know nothing of Krypton other than what my father has told me, and I've met this Earth woman, and I want to be with her, and I can't necessarily do that as Superman, so I'm going to give this up. Again, same plot point executed differently in both movies. When they brought in the second director, Richard Lester was more comfortable with comedic elements, not necessarily the epic dramatic elements. So the scenes that he shot had a more comedic feel to it. They were lighter in tone. They were somewhat silly at times. And it changes the entire feel of the movie. The other really dramatic change from the Donner cut to the theatrical cut is in the Donner cut, there's more of an examination of the relationship between Jor-El, as played by Marlon Brando, and Kal-El. Kal-El goes back to the Fortress of Solitude and basically throws a tantrum, saying to Jor-El, I don't want to be Superman anymore. I want to be with Lois. And Jor-El's like, essentially he becomes the Godfather again. You can act like a man. That's what you can do. This is really the best.
You can act like a man.
Yeah, it's really the only way to say that. And because Marlon Brando demanded billions and billions of dollars for his participation in Superman 2, and Warner Brothers was like, fuck your couch. You'll get nothing and like it. They cut Marlon Brando entirely and reshot those scenes with the woman who plays his mother, Lara, from the first movie. And the dialogue is not the same, but the themes are, which is basically, what are you, an idiot? Don't do this. This is a terrible idea. And he's like, well, I'm doing it anyway. So that's kind of where it is. And I'm going to go ahead and say that if you haven't watched the Donner Cut, you should. I think it's a much stronger, much more compelling movie. Certainly, and let's just go around real quick, yes or no. Cooper, did you watch the Donner Cut?
Half of it.
Winfree, did you watch the Donner Cut?
Not yet.
Comer, did you watch the Donner Cut?
It's harder to find the Donner Cut online than I thought it would be.
I found it easily. I found
for
it
God's
very
sake,
easily.
go buy the Blu-ray. Support your
I look like I
comedy.
made a money here, Radulich.
A, I was talking to Winfree. B, Coleman, did you watch the Donner Cut?
Twice.
Okay. So let's
I have
talk
to have
a little.
Blu-ray player then. What do you think I am, made of money?
Yeah.
Get a job, hippie. Okay, then
I'll apply.
I'm gonna go to Sean first and talk a little bit about Lois constantly trying to unmask Superman, and then I'm going to go over to you guys about the theatrical cut, which since that's the one that you're familiar with. It's going to be hard to compare and contrast them. Let's just suffice it to say, I thought the Donner way of handling it was better, but I digress. If you'll remember, Sean, in the Donner cut, Lois, right at the start of the movie, suspects Superman is Clark Kent and vice versa, and she decides to prove this fact by throwing herself out a window and demanding that he save her. Oh, it gets better. So she throws herself out the window, and he now has to deal with the fact that he's got to save this idiot, but not do it as Superman as to protect his identity. First of all, do you agree, having seen both of them, that the Donner handled it better than Lester? But what did you think of that particular sequence?
I thought that Donner handled it far better because he went a much more low-key route with it, or as low-key as you possibly can with a mildly retarded woman flinging herself off of a ledge.
On a hunch.
Which, you know what? I got to think that if somebody were to go a darker route with this, at some point when they were coming back up, Superman just whispers in her ear, "Next time I let you swim." No, I'm sorry. I wasn't a fan of that sequence, but gun to my head, if I got to choose which of the two handled it better, Lester's cut was okay, but I thought Donner handled it in a much more grounded way. So
later on, there's a difference in the way that she continues to pursue this. In the Donner cut, she pulls a gun and she shoots him. And he says, "What if you were wrong?" Yeah, she's like real psycho hose beast in the second movie. And he says, "What if you were wrong and Clark Kent was really Superman? You'd have killed him." And she goes, "Not with a blank gun, I wouldn't have. Fooled you." And then they pursue their love, which I don't know about you, but when a woman pulls a gun on me, I get hard. Now listen,
I'm attracted to danger.
Excuse me, I'm going to add some brain bleach to my cream and sugar coffee now.
Mr. Winfree, in the theatrical cut, these are handled vastly differently. They go to Niagara Falls. So they go to Niagara Falls in both movies. But in the theatrical cut, instead of throwing herself out a window at the Daily Planet, she throws herself into Niagara Falls. And then later on, the big reveal that he's really Superman is he falls in the fireplace and nothing happens to his hand. Now, I told you a little bit about how the Donner cut goes, and you've seen the theatrical cut. Some of your impressions on who handled it better?
I kind of would have to go with Donner based on how you guys are describing it. There's a couple of things about the Lester version that I kind of liked, and well, okay, not kind of like, I like to make fun of, I suppose, might be a better way to do this, but because when she finally realizes it's Superman, he reaches into the fire to get his glasses. Nothing happens to him. At that point, she not only sees that he's not hurt, but she also finally sees Clark Kent minus his glasses, and oh look, it's Superman. I'm sorry, but I don't like that particular sequence because leading up to it, and this is a slight tangent here, but it should be noted. First of all, I'm not a fan of children in general.
You should go into the profession I'm aiming for.
I think school teacher. My wine selection.
Now, hang on. So, with that, I have a very low tolerance for stupidity most of the time. And children are still exploring boundaries and figuring things out, and I'm not, angry about it, but, that they're just exploring their limitations and everything, and by nature of that, you do stupid things every now and then. In the theatrical cut, there is a child, not quite a teenager, who thinks it's a good idea to, overlooking Niagara Falls, stand on the railing that separates you from a plunge to certain death.
Oh, God.
And, to make matters worse, and this is kind of what really gets my goat, the mother, with this child, is not paying attention to him.
Yeah, this is awesome
this child is so
by the way.
Look, I'm just, that whole sequence, it annoys me to such an extent that I can't get into a movie. As far as that goes, it's like, oh look, here's a stupid child, here's a mother who couldn't care less about it. Like, what the hell? Superman should not save these people. He should smash their heads together and go, the gene pool is better off.
Then he'd be Hitler.
Oh, you know what? I don't believe in eugenics. I believe there are certain people who the world is better off without their traits being passed on.
I have
to say on that.
It's an interesting. It's a whole. Oh, hang on a sec. Your thoughts on children aside, it's a plot device scene. It's yet another example of Lois.
Superman shows up to save the child.
Right.
Superman shows up, saves the kid after he falls into Niagara Falls, and Lois realizes, oh wait, Clark's not here and Superman is. Clark's never here when Superman's around, and proceeds with her, throw herself into the river, and blah, blah, blah. And it just, that whole sequence to me was a bit off-putting so that I couldn't... I mean, yes, it's horrifically stupid to throw yourself out a window or to pull a gun on somebody. At the same time, I wouldn't have as much of an issue watching that as I do a stupid child not being corrected by a exponentially more stupid parent.
Well, look, either scene, whichever one you like, it's an example of the woman's conviction that she knows what is real and what is not real. And it gives, and it's what we were talking about with the first movie. You have to give Superman stuff to do that isn't so bloody concrete and physical because he's God and he'll easily dispatch with it. It is much harder for Kal-El to deal with the multiple identity thing and to protect the people that he loves, even when they seek to undo him at every turn, than it is to fight monsters and giant computers. It just is. So
I agree. I liked that idea. I like that she is now committed to this idea, and I agree with, from what you've described, Donner handled it better, exponentially better, and that is a facet of Superman that I think could have been explored more, and probably could have been done a lot better too. But that's neither here nor there for this.
Robert Cooper, the next series of events. The next series of events is that he takes her to the Fortress of Solitude, and in both the Donner cut and the theatrical version, they tackle it a little bit differently. I don't really recall the tremendous amount of difference here, but basically he reveals to her the entirety of his identity. And they have a nice romantic dinner in the Fortress of Solitude. And again, in the Donner cut, he whines to Jor-El about it, and the theatrical cut he whines to Laura about it, and in either case he's whining that he doesn't want to be Superman anymore. And he goes in, he messes with the machine. The machine then changes his biochemistry so that no longer will the yellow sun make him God, and he'll just be a regular mortal. Here's my major problem with this. Lois Lane has made no bones about it. She loves Superman, has no interest in Clark Kent beyond their coworkers and friends. And yet this idiot makes this decision, despite everything else, to then give up being the one thing that Lois Lane loves. Again, in terms of consistency in the plot and in what these characters are doing, did that make any sense to you? I mean, I know it tells a bigger story. It gets into the point where he has to resume the mantle because Zod's going to wreck the Earth. But even so, I don't feel like there was. If he's doing it for Lois hasn't really given him a reason to. She's not like she ever says, "Well, I'll love you body and soul, whether you're immortal or not." She says, "I love Superman." Period. So it makes the choice to give up being Superman a little odd, don't you think?
Yeah, and just revisiting what we just got finished with, I think the one cut made her seem like a fucking psycho. Like, I understand she has a conviction and she's got a hunch and she really thinks he's fucking Superman, but there are better ways to go about it, because, Lois is supposed to be a smart, savvy woman who, can kind of think on her feet and doesn't try to kill people. But, yeah, I mean, that's crazy. I mean, what if I thought you were Superman, Mark? I wouldn't go fly down to Tampa or wherever in Florida you live and come up with a gun and be like, ha-ha, you're Superman, Mark Radulich.
You'd have a rough time explaining that in court. Your Honor, I thought he was Superman.
He looks just like him. But, it just doesn't make any sense to me just the point of, he's already lost her once before. He has. Even if I were him, I would do everything I could to, protect her, which would mean I would be fucking Superman. The mortal life is all fine and dandy, but as we see when Zod shows up, if he couldn't have reversed it, he would have been, super screwed. And Lois's ass would have been dead, and his ass would have been dead, and, he was being rash and foolish, and really, this version of Lois Lane doesn't deserve Superman or Clark Kent, really, because all she loves is Superman. She doesn't care about Clark really at all beyond, about as much as I care as, a random person on the street. I really just don't give 2.5 fucks about him. It's
Sean,
just silly.
Sean, Robert uses the word rash, and you could use that as a defense of his actions here. He's acting, it's interesting because without really going full-on tantrum, there's a lot of childish behavior that Christopher Reeve Superman displays in the decisions that he makes. And so you could defend his choice to give up being Superman by saying he's rash and, he's not been confronted with a tremendous amount of really stark and weighty decisions before, and so in the few times that he has to do it, he keeps fucking it up because he's not used to this sort of thing, or, being God and all. Would you buy that? Is that a strong enough reason for him to have made such an odd choice?
I don't know, maybe a little bit, because we're still not that removed from the kind of the origin of Superman and him first, and kind of his humble beginnings, so to speak. And I guess that even for a God brought to Earth, there's going to be a little bit of a learning curve, but only up to a certain point. I guess we've kind of seen this before in superhero movies. Obviously, the first one I think of is Spider-Man 2, wherein Peter just kind of gives up completely, and now, obviously, it'll be obvious to anybody who's seen both movies now where that came from. But what I keep coming back to is what was just brought up a second ago, and that is the idea that Lois really doesn't deserve him. you would kind of understand it if it had been any other portrayal of Lois Lane as she's actually been in the comics, as being very independent, very feisty, very much able to take care of herself. A couple of times in the comics, keep in mind, she's able to really kind of outwit even Lex Luthor in ways that Superman can't, just because she's that resourceful. Now, obviously, this wasn't a storyline that had taken place yet by this point, but I'm thinking, first and foremost, kind of how she played a little bit of an integral part in kind of reigning. I forget how the architect, forgive me, it's been so long since I read it, maybe one of you guys could help me here, in kind of reining in President Lex Luthor at one point by just kind of playing the journalist game with him. So, I don't know. I'm really kind of stuck on whether or not saying rash is really the right term, except, man, for the right woman, I can see you maybe doing it. Like maybe if you were talking about somebody like Wonder Woman, sure. But for this Lois Lane, this one in particular, oh no, she's not worth giving up that kind of responsibility, that kind of role that you seem to be destined for. So, I mean, I don't know. Again, I mean, let me kind of turn it around and ask you a question. Considering all the kind of Christ-like analogies people have brought into this, where do you think this plays into the idea of temptation, into the idea of his willingness to kind of abdicate this greater role that he's got to mankind?
Like I said, I see Superman, the entity, as being a child. You know, from the time that he adopts the mantle of Superman and goes to Metropolis, he's still a baby. And he's going through sort of growing pains in these movies. I wish the movies had actually tackled that a little bit more. See Man of Steel for a better interpretation of it. But these Donner/Lester movies hint at it, and I wish they had delved more into it. But essentially, I feel like that's what they were going for here, is that, you know, if you're, he's dealing with these godlike powers and this responsibility to be the Earth's protector and everything, but he's still a mortal being in the sense that he's prone to be making mistakes and errors. And let me fast forward here into Superman 4 for just a second, because it's a terrible movie. We all know that. But there is something about Superman 4 that I found fascinating, and that was, and it actually reflects something that was said in Superman 1, where Jor-El says, "Do not interfere in the events of man. They will become too dependent on you, and you will be stretched too thin, and this planet will never evolve. They cannot come to you for everything. They must be strong and evolve on their own. Only get involved when it is absolutely necessary, you know, and then, you know, sort of find your way that way." Okay. Meanwhile, you know, a couple of movies later, he takes it upon himself to create world peace. And then he realizes at the end of the movie he can't create world peace. In the Injustice Gods Among Us game, that is exactly what his motivation is. He has decided that because of personal tragedy, he will create peace in our time the Kal-El way. And, you know, it is exactly what happens when somebody who is a child throws a tantrum and has the power of a god to carry out his will. So to go back to your question, I think my problem is what you brought up, is that Lois Lane and their relationship seems very forced, and therefore his decision to give up being God seems very rushed. It's sort of my comments about the opening sequence of the first movie. It's, on the one hand, they are taking time trying to get through all of these things. On the other, it still seems rushed. It doesn't seem like there's enough there to validate the choices that are being made. It's just, we're doing it because plot says so, and we've got a movie to get through, and we can't be here for 5 years doing this.
No, and I agree with that. And I was thinking about this the other day, because cheap plug here. Coming up this fall, Jeremy Lambert, Sam Mercady, and I are going to be doing a multi-part retrospective podcast looking at each season of Dexter. And to give a recent example, one of the things that fascinates me about that series is the way that the different women in Dexter's life come along, particularly the love interest, obviously. And they end up having an impact on it, a major evolutionary impact that ends up carrying through the rest of the series. I think that is what would have really made me appreciate Lois Lane that much more, is that there would have been an impression that while Clark is going through all this, that maybe she was kind of impacting him and really showing him something about being human. But we never really see that. You know, you hit the nail right on the head pretty simply, because plot says so. That's why they're together, not because it, you know, opens up Clark's heart and shows him Clark's heart, like he's a damn Time Lord. Clark's heart, Kal-El's heart, I should say, and really shows him wonders of the world that up to this point he hasn't seen. It's just kind of meet cute and then off into the sunset. That's about it. There's no evolution past that.
Yeah. I think you should have a stronger reason to love somebody other than vagina.
There's always a far stronger reason than that, yeah.
High school would have worked out a lot better for a lot more people.
What was that?
I said high school would have worked out a lot better for a lot more people if that were true.
Oh, God, would it?
All right. Don't go off the rails here. Okay. I want to talk. We have been talking about Superman 2 for about a half an hour now, and we have not once talked about Zod, Ursula, and Man Bear Pig. So.
Oh, shame on us.
Man Bear Pig.
I don't remember. Yeah, I don't remember his name, but I've now come to call him Man Bear Pig. His name is. I am not calling him some sort of bread item. His name is Man Bear Pig.
His name is Non.
Is that a bread they serve with Indian cuisine?
His name is Non. He is a 7-foot juggernaut that doesn't need words.
Right. So Zod, Ursula, and the Big Show. Got it.
Ursa.
Oh God, he's the Great Khali.
I think we can all agree that. I mean, we talked about this at the I think prior to the podcast starting, and maybe even afterwards. And if we haven't, then let's get it out of the way now. Terrence Stamp's portrayal of Zod is both understated and astounding all at the same time. There's a quiet menace about his character that he brings. He doesn't have to be all crazy, and the only time he ever really shouts and gets angry in the movie is when he's telling people to kneel, and even then it's only after they won't listen to him, the third or fourth time. The other two are basically henchmen 1 and 2. I think they play their roles adequately enough, but Terrence Stamp is carrying the lion's share of the villain role. I just want to kind of go around, and I'll go to my expert in villains first. Did Zod have enough to do in this movie? Because they spend an awful lot of time focusing on, in both cuts, Reeve, Superman, and Lois, and there's the whole thing with the trucker, and the trucker beats him up, and he's got to bleed for the first time, and then there's everyone in the diner yells ECW. So there's that. But there's somewhere in all of this that got to get to Zod, and there's the whole sequence of, oh God, if you've got to land anywhere on Earth, you land in like the swamps of Texas or something like that, and they're shooting snakes and they're messing with the locals. Did Zod do enough for you in this movie, or should have given him more, Mr. Winfree?
Well, naturally, they should have given him more. A great villain should always get more screen time than they get, it seems like. But I feel like, and from what I understand of the Donner Cut, I haven't seen it, but from what I understand of it, he gets a bit more time, and he does some other things that kind of cement his villainy in a different way. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, those of you who have seen the Donner Cut, but doesn't he actually pick up like an AR-15 and gun down a bunch of people on the steps of the White House?
Yes, he does, and he does it while smiling.
That's
yes,
metal.
which is perfect, because here he is, he has the powers of a god. He could just breathe on these people and knock and blow them into next week. He could kill them with his heat rays. No, he actually wants to shoot them with a gun.
Well, hang on. It's a scene where, we were talking about Kal-El doesn't, because he's been on Earth all of this time, he doesn't seem to see the finer points of humanity. Zod is reveling in it. Zod's like, what's this? Oh, it's a gun. It does this stuff. Let me try it. And then he has a ball with it.
I love so much about what Terrence Stamp does for Zod, and it should be noted that in the comics, prior to this, Zod was not much of a character. He was mentioned, but he wasn't a big deal. The way Terrence Stamp acted and the way this movie was received turned Zod into a big deal, and he deserves all kinds of credit in the world for that. He could have been given more. He maybe should have been given more, just because there were other elements of this movie that weren't as big a deal and could have been kind of left out. I still get a kick out of his interactions with Lex Luthor, and I still enjoy Gene Hackman's portrayal of Luthor in this one. It falls a bit more in line with what Luthor should be, but I still, one of my favorite sequences from this entire movie, Superman, I believe, has gotten his powers back, and he hovers outside the window of the Daily Planet. He knocks on the window and says, General, would you care to step outside? And Lex Luthor's immediate reaction is, oh, thank God, Superman. I mean, get him. And Zod immediately goes into his, okay, you'll kneel before Zod spiel, which is still great. But this movie could have definitely used more Terrence Stamp, for sure. I mean, he was the perfect villain. Here's someone who has the mind of a tactician, who has all the powers that Superman does, but is, more than a little bit crazy. And he is here, he wants to conquer Earth, he wants to be God. He has the powers of a god. No, you're all going to do what I say, you're all going to worship me. You will kneel before Zod. That's...
Let me stop you there and challenge that for a second. Can you explain to me what in the hell he was trying to... I mean, other than he wants revenge on the House of El, what else is his motivation for having come to Earth? Because it seems like he's just like, well, I'm really here to kill Superman, but while I'm here, this planet seems ripe for taking over. I mean, and is that really a sufficient enough motivation to do anything? It just sort of seems tacked on.
It's not tacked on in the sense that, we need to have him do other things. It felt to me, and it's been a while since I've seen the movies all the way through, been able to actually study them, but it seems to me that that's kind of an organic growing out of, okay, I wish to kill Kal-El for revenge. I can hurt him by hurting these people who he's trying to protect, and, oh, look at this, I can actually, because I'm so powerful, they can all be my slaves and I can basically do whatever I want. It feels more like he's grown beyond just simple vengeance, and, I'm all for simple vengeance. I mean, don't get me wrong. That's a great motivation. Everyone understands it. At the same time, the way Zod is, it feels like there has to be a bit more. And if he can conquer an entire planet, as a side note to exacting revenge on the House of El, that's really as good as it gets for him. I mean,
I hate to say it, but you guys
maybe I'm extrapolating a bit too much, but that's kind of how it feels for me.
I hate to say it, but you guys are looking at it kind of backwards.
Well, that's true. They did show up on Earth just kind of to conquer it and be there, and it just turned out that Superman was there.
Well, right, because, I mean, Zod establishes in the first scene of Superman that his ultimate ambition is just that he wants to be an absolute ruler of all that he surveys.
it just so happens that when he comes to Earth, it so happens there's this protector named Superman, and it's not until later in the movie that Lex Luthor, having been to the Fortress of Solitude, lets Zod in on the little secret that's Jor-El's baby boy. Well, okay. Well, then all of a sudden he's got even more motivation. So,
that's a good point, and you're absolutely right. I had that reversed because I'm thinking of something else. But you're right. They escape the Phantom Zone. They land on Earth and go, "You people are pretty weak, and we are." Yeah, you people are weak. We are strong. I don't know. But don't you think, though, that also makes Zod a tad one-dimensional in this particular portrayal? I want to conquer all that I survey. All right. So does everybody. So does every other villain. Meh.
As far as the villainous motivation, yeah, it's been there and done that. A lot of people, villain motivation is kind of a tricky thing to come up with something new that isn't. Why reinvent the wheel, so to speak? I mean, yeah, he wants to conquer everything he sees. Here you also have an actor who can portray that kind of a despot and that kind of a conqueror with, instead of an over-the-top maniacal way, a much colder, a much more calculated, a much more understated way of going about it. So why should he need necessarily extemporaneous motivation? When you start over-explaining things is when they get less interesting. I mean, we talked about that a bit when we talked about Paranormal Activity. Sometimes it's better to just keep things simple. And in this case, yes, he wants to conquer, and then when you add on revenge to it, it still works. It still makes sense because he would be doing that. I mean, it just kind of flows within the story. It's Luthor, kind of manipulating him into, yes, I need you to kill Superman. How can I get you to do it? Oh, by the way, you hate the L Clan.
And I might add, it's not like there have never been actual, for real, these human beings throughout human history who just wanted to conquer as much of the Earth as they could just because. It's not like, it's not like there was ever anybody else who just conquered because fuck it, conquering. I mean, that's maybe simplifying it a little bit, but I mean that describes the whole reason why many of history's leaders and despots and emperors and kings all kind of went on the rampages they did just because they kind of felt, I'm more powerful, I'm entitled to it.
Well, there was always more to it than that. But, I mean, I guess I'm not necessarily arguing against that. Sometimes I wish villains were a little bit more fleshed out. The problem is Terrence Stamp's portrayal of Zod is awesome, and you can easily forget that he has there isn't a whole lot to why he's there or what he's all about. He's just kind of there doing stuff. And like I said, you can forgive that if the doing stuff is cool enough and the performance is top-notch, which it is. Coop, you want to add anything about his henchmen in this, Ursa and Man-Bear-Pig? Did they add anything? Were they just window dressing? What was your impression of their deal?
I didn't think they were really all that interesting. I mean, when you consider that, y'all were just conversing about how you found Zod to be a little, slightly, or at least it sounded like a little one-dimensional. I mean, hell, if he's one-dimensional, Jesus, his henchmen are pretty much like half-dimensional. They don't even have one. But as for Zod, I really wish they would have given him more time. I'm trying to think, what would I maybe take some away from the whole love story bullshit. Hell, I wish they would have done that in both movies. Would have had a lot more focus on your villains. You could have fleshed things out, and it would have been an overall better movie, considering you had a pretty useless damsel in distress who just seems to screw everything up. But yeah, I mean the two henchmen are pretty just. You could have replaced them with the real Man-Bear-Pig, and that would have been fine.
Yeah, Sarah Douglas was definitely not as, shall we say, fleshed out as she was in Beastmaster 2.
They should have had that character. It would have been fantastic.
I've not seen that movie, but I'm assuming she was naked.
Well, close enough to it. She's pretty much a fabulous talking pair of breasts.
Okay.
Awesome.
We are now into the recorded portion of this podcast, so I want to close up our discussion of Superman 2, talk about Superman 3 and 4, and then we will be done with this epic podcast.
Let's get something clear, folks. If you come back for the overrun this time, it means you are really dedicated to watch this entire show. Because you've sat and listened to 2 good movies now. Now you've got to listen to us talk about 3 and 4.
Let's close out our discussion of 2 here. They wreck Metropolis, having a fight, and it's just they wreck the place. It's when Jeffrey Harris got through a big stinking fit over the fight between Shannon Zod and Cavill's Superman in Man of Steel. And you have much the same problem here. You have 4 gods destroying a city with absolutely no care in the world to the mortals around them, except that the camera doesn't really bother to show the mortals in too much peril. I think they do a better job of it in Superman 2 than they do in Man of Steel, because Superman does get to a point where he's like, I'm going to end up killing lots of people if we don't get this moved. Not to mention the fact that with this fighting will go on forever because we're all gods. So his plan is he's going to trick them into becoming mortals at the Fortress of Solitude. As a resolution, I thought this was much stronger than the first movie, obviously. But so if you guys want, we can talk a little bit about the resolution. I mean, what's there to say? But there's something that's very different in the theatrical cut versus the Donner cut. And correct me if I'm wrong, but in the theatrical cut, after he's dispensed with Zod and his minions, and they fall into the ice flow of death. I don't really understand what the fuck happens to these people. They all get hit and they fall in the ice, and then you never see them again. I'm guessing underneath the Fortress of Solitude is the Phantom Zone, but I digress. If one of you guys has a theory as to what in the hell they fell into, be my guest. But
that's a dangerous fall.
Watch out for that first step at the Lulu. But we have the problem of, once it's all said and done, Lois Lane still knows who Superman is, and they can't be together, blah, blah, yakety schmackety. And in one version of this, he turns time around and she simply forgets. In another version, he gives her the kiss of amnesia, and she wakes up the next day in the Lester cut, and she's crying, and she doesn't remember what's happened here, and I don't totally remember that whole sequence, but basically it's the 2 different ways of handling it is one's the kiss and one is turning back time. So I'll go over to you first, Sean. The resolution, the fight scene, and then the handling of Lois's memory. Was that okay by you? Do you think, again, we this sort of suffers from having written themselves into a corner and lazy writing and all of that? What were your thoughts?
I was okay right up until either Superman gets his share on and turns back time, or depending on which version you watch, he gives Lois some super sugar and completely wipes her mind out. Hey, not the first time, I'm sure, that Margot Kidder would wake up weeping and wondering what the hell happened or where the hell she was. Nor would it be the last.
I was going to make that joke.
That's what you get for interrupting me earlier.
No, I was the one who interrupted you earlier.
Yeah.
You? I couldn't tell which of you it was. Okay.
Damn.
Wonder Twin Power activate.
Anyway, no, I thought that they were both pretty lazy, and again, it's the same problem with it that I expressed before, that I so often have the problem with the way Superman stories are written, and I'm going to sound like a hypocrite because the people who know me who are listening to this know that I am a big old Whovian, and
they're going to probably remind me, but they've done the same thing on Doctor Who repeatedly, written into a corner. Okay, just make it a problem that the Doctor can miraculously solve with the sonic screwdriver or the TARDIS in an instant. It seems like a cop-out and a way to just kind of get out of everything with absolutely no consequences whatsoever. Just pretty much everything is undone, nobody really learns anything, and just everything is tied up with a nice, neat, pretty little bow. No, your story should not end that way. Not when you did such a good job in the first movie, up until, of course, the ending, of trying to establish Clark actually learning something about humanity. I think it would have added a lot of depth to the rest of the series if you would have had to add the element to it of, oh, by the way, Lois knows he's Superman. Which, of course, is the way it ultimately plays out in the comics, is Lois knows that he's Superman, Clark knows that she knows, and they just go forth and try to make the best of it. And it leads to better writing and better stories.
I just want to say that I agree with you on that. I think if the idea was to do more and more Superman movies, it's much more dramatic and effective for Lois having to... I mean, because that's essentially what happens is she's in pain. It's coming back to me now. She knows that they can't be together, and she knows that he's Superman, which is why they can't be together, and it hurts her. She's in pain because of this, and in order to stop the pain, in order to stop her from suffering, he just wipes out her memory of all of those events. And I'm like, no, wait a minute. You know, to paraphrase Captain Kirk, I need my pain. Pain is good. Pain is what gives us drama. Is what gives us stakes. Is what gives us compelling action. And they just take it all away as if to say, we don't want anyone to be upset that Lois is sad. You know, it's treating the audience like a bunch of children, and it's like, well, no, don't, you fucked up your own movie by doing that.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I need to branch out a little bit here from that and say, you know, you can do that same sequence. You can do the same, you know, essentially this doesn't happen, and it can still be important and it can still have an impact as long as you keep, as long as in this case, you know, Superman, as long as he, you know, kind of carries that and has to live with the fact that he did that and doesn't just kind of brush it off. I mean, two of the examples, you know, the two examples I'm going to bring up here of that's essentially the same thing, but done in a much better way and handled much better are actually from television. The first one that comes to my mind, at least, is in season 6, I think, of Supernatural. Yeah, it is. It's 6 of Supernatural. For those of you who don't watch the show, one of the main characters, Dean, had been living with the love of his life, basically, and her son for the past year. Then he gets back into the events that make Supernatural go on. They're put in peril, and his solution to this is he has Castiel, their angel, at that point kind of enemy, he has him wipe their minds of him. So they don't know who he is, they have no memory of him, they go on with their lives and they're safe and happy. And what makes it not seem kind of contrived is that's clearly not an easy thing for the character of Dean to live with. I mean, they have a brief sequence after that where his brother comes up to him and goes, you know, you've done some questionable things in the past, but come on, you're going to whitewash their memories. And he looks at him, and the only thing he says is, if you ever bring them up to me again, I'm going to break your jaw. And it adds a bit to the character that, you know, it's a sacrifice that he's willing to make. And the other one that does basically the same thing, in the first season of Angel, there's an episode where he becomes human again. And it comes about that, you know, Buffy would die if he stayed human. His hero's burden is lifted. He can go on and live a normal life, but he can't live with himself if he does that, if he's absolved of this responsibility. So he has the oracles turn back time, but he has to remember everything so that he can change the outcome. And again, if you're using it to add a layer to the hero, I mean, and you know, that particular episode of Angel always kind of tears my guts out for a variety, because it just seems so unfair, and it is. But if you handle it in that way, it becomes a tool to make things more real, to add depth to a character, and it's a direction they chose not to go with it. Instead, it seems like they were just trying to gloss it over instead of using it as a way to make things more interesting, to add depth.
I think we've all satisfactorily discussed both of the Donner epics and the Lester perversion. I think we can go on to Lester's first standalone movie, Superman 3. Everyone okay with that?
Brace yourself, folks. Here comes the stupid.
All right, so let me talk a little bit about the setup for this thing, and I don't necessarily mean the plot. I mean, why did we get this movie? Well, as we said before, Donner has now left the film at gunpoint. Lester is on, and they bring him back to do a third Superman movie, and he brings with it all of the comedy elements that he brought into the second movie. So this has a completely different tone than the first two movies. It's much campier. It's much more, Superman is a clown kind of a thing. They bring in Richard Pryor because it just isn't funny enough without Richard Pryor. Doesn't use the N-word, by the way. I just want to make sure I put that out there. This is a clean Pryor. Hang on, Sean. And just give me 1 second. The one thing I want to point out with this is part of the reason why the cast of Superman is so drastically different from any of the other movies. No Gene Hackman this time. Margot Kidder is pretty much written out of the movie except for the very beginning. Allegedly, depending on which side of the story you believe, Hackman and Margot Kidder pretty much took Donner's side in the Donner-Warner Brothers feud. So Warner Brothers punished both of them by pretty much not including Gene Hackman at all in this movie, and replacing him with Robert Vaughn and just giving Robert Vaughn a new character, which was basically the same as Lex Luthor.
It's Lex Luthor with hair.
Yeah, it's
just Lex Luthor without being bald.
Well, they don't call him Lex Luthor as he's doing all the Lex Luthor-y stuff that we've gotten used to without actually having to call him Lex Luthor. Instead, he's ham sandwich.
He's ham sandwich.
That's about right.
Margot Kidder is in the movie, but she basically makes a cameo at the beginning and at the end and does nothing. And the love interest in this movie is Lana Lang. Go ahead, Sean. What were you going to add?
Okay, well, a couple things. First, actually, you are mostly right. Gene Hackman came out and publicly took Alexander and Ilya Salkind, the producers of the franchise, to task for the way they had treated Richard Donner. So much so, in fact, that he refused to play Lex Luthor entirely. The reason he came back in Superman 4 for a brief role was because
he needed money.
Because Salkind had nothing to do with that movie. They weren't connected with it at all. As far as Margot Kidder goes, she was punished by being written entirely out of it, except for a brief cameo. Now, the interesting thing about this is there was actually another story that was written. Ilya Salkind, when he, one of the producers, had actually written an original treatment that was a complete departure from what we ended up getting. It included as the main villains Brainiac and Mr. God, I never pronounced his name right. Mr. Mxyzptlk. Mxyzptlk. Okay, fine. Mr. M. I'll just go with that one.
Mr. Gilbert Gottfried.
Shut up.
Well, actually, it's funny you mention that because when they were considering that one, they were considering Dudley Moore to play him, and to play him as a darker version of him, whereas instead of just being kind of like...
If they're going to get Dudley Moore, he has to play... Now I want this to happen. They need to drag Dudley Moore up from whatever bar he's currently in, and he has to play Mr. Mxyzptlk as Arthur.
Okay, Dudley Moore is dead, I'm pretty sure.
Is
he
he?
could dig him up from whatever bar he's buried under. Yeah, he's been dead since 2002.
Has he really?
Yes.
Well, yeah.
Now I'm sad.
Anyway, so, but the point being is that, oh, and by the way, this was also going to be originally supposed to be the movie in which they introduced Supergirl as well. We all know how that eventually panned out.
That was a great movie.
Yeah. But actually, the plot they came up with is actually kind of interesting because you have Mr. M, who's a little darker and actually uses his powers to really hurt people. And meanwhile, you've also got Brainiac discovering, kind of happening upon Supergirl, kind of a foundling, similar to the way the Kents happened upon Kal-El. So, you know, that was one direction that it could have possibly gone, and instead,
50 words or less. What did Warner Brothers do to harpoon this script and give us what we got?
That's the one part that I can't really find. I guess just Warner Brothers just generally didn't like it, and you know, okay, brief tangent time, and I'm going to try to keep this brief. I promise you.
Yes, please remember we've got about a half an hour left.
Okay, I'll try to keep it as brief as I can. This is my problem with what happens every time someone tries to do a damn Superman movie, is the fact they don't realize there are other villains you can go with other than Lex Luthor. In fact, I'm impressed they even remember who the fuck Zod was to work him into Superman 2. Because, and in the Man of Steel, of course. Because otherwise, other than him, you've got Brainiac, you've got Darkseid. The latter day, you've got Doomsday, you've got Metallo, you've got Bizarro Superman, although, okay, that's getting a little in the campy direction. You know, you don't have to always just knee-jerk right to the same villain and just be completely lost otherwise. The other problem that leads to is the fact that you then get writers who try to be more clever than they are and get it into their heads they can somehow do the characters better than the people who have written them previously. Because half the time, you've got the stories that you need right there. They're right in the books. All you have to do is just find a way to make them fit the format. Instead, you know, you get somebody who has an idea to work a couple of non-Lex Luthor, heaven forbid, villains and characters into the movie. But instead, we get Brainiac reduced to a fucking IBM, and, you know, Richard Pryor trying to help somebody put the world in a financial fucking stranglehold. And then God only knows what kind of idea that was for Superman 4. So it's a consequence of being made by people with no love whatsoever for the actual characters of the franchise.
Well, no, let me add on to this really, really quickly, and then let's actually talk about the movie that was made. This is what I've said before. I said it during the Batman podcast, and I'm going to repeat it every time it is repeating. Apparently, many studio executives have no guts. They go with what has worked previously, and they don't like to take risks. Occasionally, you do take a risk, and it works, and you redefine movies, and great things happen, and then you repeat that a million times until somebody else comes along with a little bit of a backbone. The problem with the latter Superman movies is, and I can almost hear the executives saying this out loud, you can't do a Superman movie without Lex Luthor. We had him in the first two. Those movies made a lot of money. Ergo, these will make money because they have Lex Luthor in them. And that's really it. And if you're saying, but Mark, that doesn't make any sense, and I'm going to tell you, right. We can sit here as four nerds and say, no, have some backbone. Use all these other characters. What are you, nuts? And I'm going to tell you that I've actually talked to some of these people, and that's kind of how they think. Nope, this already made money. We're not changing anything. Therefore, you have Lex Luthor. Yeah, therefore you have Lex Luthor or a reasonable facsimile in Superman 3.
Luthor hostage.
So, just a real quick plot summary, because there's really only 3 points to talk about with this movie. Richard Pryor, Fall Brainiac, and Superman drunk. Okay? Because Superman drunk fighting himself is right up there with Al Snow having a match with himself. And for those of you listening to this who don't know wrestling, there once was a wrestler who actually did a full-on match by himself. He wrestled himself, and it was awesome.
I've never seen that.
Shawn Michaels.
That makes my life.
So,
Hulk. That was great.
But the 50 words or less plot summary is Richard Pryor plays a down-on-his-luck computer savant, and he ends up stealing. He pulls an office space, and he steals the fractions of a penny from Robert Vaughn, who plays Ham Sandwich Lex Luthor. So Ham Sandwich Lex Luthor then co-opts him into working for him and making him do dastardly things. But by doing dastardly things, they catch the attention of Superman, who undoes the dastardly things, and therefore Ham Sandwich Lex Luthor wants to now kill Superman, and he wants Richard Pryor to figure out a way to do that. Richard Pryor, after working off his debt, decides that what I really, really want is for you to make me a supercomputer, and they use then the supercomputer to try to kill Superman. And that supercomputer it's alluded to that the supercomputer is supposed to be Brainiac, but it's never really said in the movie, and the only reason why I know that is because I read the Wikipedia entry on it. But if you just watch the movie cold and you don't do any background research, you have no fucking clue what this thing is supposed to be or why Richard Pryor wants it. The actual dialogue in that scene is mind-numbingly stupid. Richard Pryor has worked off his debt, and he says, you get your Ham Sandwich Lex Luthor, you get your way all the time, and I just want to know when I'm going to get a taste. And Robert Vaughn says, well, what do you want? And he goes, and he starts pulling out all these pieces of paper, and he's got this blueprint for a supercomputer. He goes, this is the most powerful computer ever designed. And he goes, okay, well, what do you want it for? Well, it'll do whatever you tell me to tell it to do. And he goes, well, can it kill Superman? He goes, yes. And I raise my hand at that point and go, why does Richard Pryor want to kill Superman? I know why Richard Vaughn wants to kill Superman. Why does Richard Pryor wants to kill Superman? And that is the
ship.
Yeah, what does God need with a starship? So that's the first major plot problem with this movie. Most of it takes place in Smallville, hence Lana Lang is the love interest. And so I want to just really briefly actually focus in on that. And like I said, we can't spend a tremendous amount of time with any one of these subjects, so kind of hit it and get to the point. Lana Lang and the woman that portrays her, I'm not going to blame the actress for that portrayal, but I found the way they wrote Lana Lang to be very jarring and annoying, in the sense that she constantly changes subject mid-sentence, and it's meant to be funny, and it comes off as just off-putting, wouldn't you say, Mr. Winfree?
I would, and it's kind of sad because the actress who portrays her, Annette O'Toole, actually is a pretty decent actress. She played Martha Kent on the television show Smallville. She was in the miniseries It. She played the female member of the Losers. I forget the character's name because I haven't read the book in forever. She is very kind of jarring and off-putting in this movie, and she's meant to be this kind of stretched thin, being pulled a bunch of different directions, single mother, and I don't know if the writers at the time didn't know how to accurately write that or what it was that kind of got as far as that went, but she's, nobody has been able to make, to this point, a compelling love interest for Superman. You always kind of look at them and go, why? And that's a problem with this one, too, and it's kind of sad, but you also have Richard Pryor drunk, talking to a computer, acting by himself, and what is some of the best stuff in that entire movie, I think.
Oh, I do want to hit that just because I love it so much. I must mention it, but I don't want to get there yet. The Billy Flash, yeah, absolutely. No, actually, let's get into Pryor. I mentioned that I love Richard Pryor. I love most of I love his stand-up. He's one of stand-up comedies gods, along with Bill Cosby and George Carlin, and Sam Kinison. Those are my four horsemen. I just think the world of Richard Pryor, and I know that not everything he's done, The Toy, for example, has been just awesome. Richard Pryor kind of plays Richard Pryor in this movie, and he plays Richard Pryor in a lot of things. You know, there are things where he actually acts, and he acts very well. Kind of like Jim Carrey in that sense. It's kind of like, I can be more of an actor. Nope, just be Richard Pryor. Okay. And he is. But Sean, I know you hate this movie in all kinds of ways, and you have all sorts of problems with it. If you could just sort of focus in on the inclusion of Richard Pryor and all of that, and keep it to 50 words or less, why don't we talk a little bit about why you hate Richard Pryor's inclusion in this movie?
Okay. I made a big deal out of it to egg you on and get your goat a little bit, but the truth is, no, I love Richard Pryor. You will never hear me have a bad thing to say about him at all. It's just that he's a tremendous performer who is in a movie that was just a stupid concept from the very beginning. And so, you know, kind of by association, I don't like him being in it because I don't feel like he's even able to bring anything to it that really makes it any better. It's another case of great performer, but given nothing to work with. And the whole concept of his character just kind of drags it down. So kind of by association, I just don't like him being in it. It reminds me of the episode of Batman, the animated series, where the small-time will-do-nothing thug, Sid the Squid, the little bag man, accidentally seemingly sends Batman to his doom. And the whole episode just kind of plays off of that. And that works fine for a 30 minutes with commercial animated show. But when you're trying to parlay this into a movie wherein in the previous two movies Superman has taken on Lex Luthor and a combination of Lex Luthor and General Zod, it's pretty damn anticlimactic for your villain in this movie to be ham sandwich Lex Luthor, Richard Pryor as a computer savant, and Brainiac reincarnated as a computer. God, I feel like I must have swallowed crazy pills having to say that last part. It's nothing against Pryor himself. It's against Pryor being in there executing his part in a very stupid concept.
Yeah, it does feel like the writers midway through forgot they were doing a Superman movie and decided to create a comedy vehicle for Richard Pryor. It was almost as if they decided they weren't going to make a Superman movie anymore. They were going to make a Richard Pryor movie with Superman in it. And that's how this whole movie comes across. This movie comes across like it's one of the slew, like somewhere between the toy and Brewster's Millions is Superman 3.
See no evil, hear no evil.
Yeah, that's a brilliant movie. Robert,
it's a funny-ass movie.
Robert Cooper, I want to quick talk about this so that we can get it done, and then we can move on to the B movie that was Superman 4. The only thing that saves this movie, the only thing that makes it even remotely good, and good is a relative term, is a particularly brilliant plot point that leads to an awesome scene. Now, they decide that they're going to kill Superman with Kryptonite, because that's what you do, and they can't get their hands on real Kryptonite, so they're going to recreate it by trying to figure out what the elements of Kryptonite are, and then just recreating it in a lab. And one of the elements is unknown, and so Richard Pryor, in a Kaiser Soze moment, looks at a pack of cigarettes and goes, "Fuck it, I'll just make it tar." So Kryptonite minus the missing element plus tar equals turns Superman into a raging drunk. Awesome.
Good God.
So
seems legit.
So instead of it killing Superman, it makes him evil. And I also think that the intention was for them to include Bizarro, but instead of doing Bizarro, they just turned Superman into Bizarro for a little while.
Yeah. Here, real quick.
Go ahead.
Bizarro is quite a goofy villain. He's not really one that you can necessarily take seriously for very long. And, I'll ask to say anybody who wants to chime in, all three of you can go at it if you want to. would this have actually been made better or worse, or just kind of kept the same by including Bizarro in this weird story?
If they don't, let me say this: if they don't do the Brainiac ending, and what ends up happening is the tar Kryptonite makes him evil, and then he exercises the evil, and the evil is Bizarro, and then Bizarro goes nuts and just starts doing stuff, and he has to like find Bizarro and stop him. I think it's a better. I think if almost the villains like accidentally create Bizarro, and Bizarro just starts wrecking stuff, including Ham Sandwich Lex Luthor's empire, and so like they're like forced into now helping Superman defeat Bizarro. I think you have a much better, to me, a much stronger Act 3 than what we got instead. But that's the thing, and that kind of goes back to the junkyard scene. You know, Superman for a couple of scenes is, you know, like blowing out kids' birthday cakes, and you know, and he doesn't save a bus full of children. You know, he's just a jerk off.
He straightens the Leaning Tower of Pisa.
Dude, that is some funny shit.
He's not really evil. I mean, not in the way wherein in Spider-Man 3 you had Spider-Man killing the Sandman and trying to blow up Harry Osborn. It's not really evil so much as it is, you're just a douchebag.
Yeah, he becomes a jerk. Right. So, go ahead, Robert.
I was just going to say, we talked about this a little bit, Pat Mullen and I did on the Superman Villain podcast, because Superman has gone bad a couple of times throughout his history. And he goes more evil and different in other incarnations. Here, it's just he becomes kind of he's kind of a jerk. He's like, oh, no, I'm going to blow out your candles. No, I envisioned that particular Superman, that version of Superman, is what has inspired the legion of Judd Apatow comedies that he needs to be shot for.
Okay. In the interest of time, Cooper, really 50 words or less, your impressions of... I think the junkyard scene is brilliantly acted. I loved it. I wish they had done a little bit more with it instead of... Because they resolved it all in that one scene, and they could have... That could have given birth to so much more in the movie and really saved it. Instead, it was like, well, here's an obstacle, he deals with it, and then we move on to the Brainiac sequence. But for what it was and what they decided to give us, rather than Monday morning quarterbacking this thing, what was your impression of Superman versus Clark Kent in the junkyard?
I was entertained. Hell, I wish the whole movie would have been douchebag Superman.
That would have been
great, you know. They make douchebag Superman, and then Richard Pryor and Ham Sandwich Lex Luthor are stuck in like a buddy, almost like a buddy situation, where they have to undo it before he ends up screwing the whole world.
That would have been awesome.
You know what? I mean, it's not like they care about Superman really, but when you look at it, so why not just make Superman like the odd villain, and just turn this whole bitch into turn it into a Richard Pryor comedy. Bam! I mean, douchebag Superman. He wasn't even a villain. He was just an inconvenience. He is.
You could find him drunk on the streets of Metropolis with a beard, and then everyone could ask again, how does Superman shave? Because in the next sequence, he'd be clean shaven.
He's not a broken leg. He's jock itch. That's basically what he is.
Jor-El not only gave him the secrets of the universe, but a razor that can cut his face.
He has his laser vision for. They already solved that problem years ago.
He reflected off the mirror, right?
Yeah, Superman the Animated Series did it.
If you watch Superman 3 for any reason, you must watch the scene where, and it's on YouTube, you don't even watch the whole movie, but there's a great sequence where Richard Pryor has to trick his way into a computer in Kansas. And I don't have the time to do the whole bit. I used to do this word for word, but it starts with "Where's the real trouble, man?" And he does like the white newscaster voice that I guess he did on Saturday Night Live. But he tricks Lana Lang's ex-boyfriend or jealous lover into letting him into this computer. They get drunk, and now he's drunk, and he has to hack into this computer. And there's a great sequence where he reads a sign that says, you have to insert both keys at the same time, and they're out of reach. And so It's just Richard Pryor. Looks like he's improvising, and he's drunk. And if I haven't mentioned that already, and he's trying to get the keys in there, and he can't do it. And he gets up. He's like, "You think you've beaten me, haven't you? The Philly Flash!" And I fucking lose it every time. My wife.
Get ready for the Philly Flash.
Yeah,
and he then comes back with the passed out cop. Tied a string around his wrist so that he can get them both in at the same time.
Right. And then he spends the next 20 minutes hacking into this thing. But that is fucking awesome. I called my wife from whatever it was she was doing. So I'd have been taking care of my child. And I'm like, fucking put the kid down. Come see this. And she looks at me and she says, I love you. I don't know what in the hell you brought me in here for. But at least now she knows.
Awesome.
But now at least she knows why. Now we know. Now at least she knows why. While we're driving somewhere or whatever, and I've like put one over on her or something, I'll just randomly yell out the Philly Flash.
Let's start doing it. I mean, this is just proof that like shit like this should have been the movie. Like douchebag Superman and the Philly Flash.
That should have been the name of it. Instead of Superman, douchebag Superman and the Philly Flash.
Superman 3, into the Philly Flash.
Someone needs to make
it would have made boatloads of money.
Absolutely.
Of course,
all right.
douchebag Superman would have made Philly Flash have a whole new meaning.
That would have been instead of the Philly Flash, it would have been the Filthy Flash.
Oh my!
Well, because he'd do it around Philly.
No, but the Phil Cosby referred to Philadelphia as Filthydelphia.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
All right. Superman 4.
The real comedy.
Sean, in 20 words or less, the Salkinds have sold their rights to Superman, and it gets picked up by Metro-Goldwyn Jewish and Ham Sandwich, and they take the movie in a completely different direction. A little bit of insight on that? Go.
You want me to give a little bit of insight on that?
Yeah.
Oh, God. This was the one that I actually bothered researching the least, just because, God, I almost don't care really what went wrong with it, because nothing I would be able to find could possibly justify it. I really don't know what to tell you, except for the fact that by this point, all I could find was the fact that the producers felt that the end was pretty much nigh. They had gone to this well about as many times as they were supposed to. Supergirl had already tanked. Yeah, the franchise had been sold off at this point. Nobody even had a script in mind when they came to Reeve, wanting him to come back for a fourth movie, and Reeve was pissed. He actually really actively hated the thing himself.
The only reason, if you don't mind me interjecting a little bit here, the only reason he agreed to appear in this movie was the production company basically said, we'll give you whatever other movie you want to do. We'll take care, we'll produce it. Whatever else you want to do, if you come back and do Superman, we'll do. So they basically bribed him. They did the Marlon Brando offer he couldn't refuse, and then the company went bankrupt before they actually got around to it anyway.
I was going to say, didn't they welch on the deal?
Yep. And in the process, they also slashed the budget on the damn thing. And it's universally hated, not just by fans, but pretty much by everybody who was involved in this thing. In fact, there's a story that John Cryer. Yes, folks, you want a good indication of how bad this is? You want a good indication? Fucking Ducky is in this movie.
Well, Superman, dude, righteous.
Ducky is playing Lex Luthor's nephew. Supposedly, basically, Reeve pulled him aside and pretty much told him, this is going to suck.
How you guys doing? This is gonna suck.
Yeah, pretty much. Just make no mistake whatsoever. They couldn't even really get John Williams back to do this entire thing because he was already working with the Boston Pops Orchestra
orchestra.
No, I'm pretty
at the time.
sure the music was all done on kazoo.
Yeah, so instead he puts in a good word for his buddy Alexander Courage. God, is that an appropriate name for anybody working on this movie? And this sucks, folks.
The point that I wanted you to talk about there was, and you did say it, but they sold their rights to, here's the actual name of it, Golden Globus. Apparently Golden Globus was a big pyramid scheme where they would take money for one film and then spread it to a bunch of projects, and then they would all suck. And that's kind of what happened with Superman 4. Superman 4 may have at one time had a concrete script to it, but even the best script, if you start doing really stupid things with it, you'll just tear it apart. And so this also, this is muddled by a bunch of different things. It's this idea that Superman can create peace on Earth by getting rid of the nuclear weapons, and that all the countries who 5 seconds ago weren't willing to give up and then are willing to give up when Superman says he'll get rid of them. Sure, why not? It's muddled by the
worst villain in Superman history.
Yeah, I was just saying the whole creation of. My favorite part about this villain is that his big Achilles heel is shade.
It's true.
Let me say, I talked about the Superman villains extensively over 2 hours. I would rather they have used Titano, who, for those of you who don't know, is a giant ape who shoots kryptonite beams from his eyes.
Oh, yeah.
He would have been better than the Nuclear Man.
So, yeah, the problem is that even if you had a solid script, watching, this low budget, this is the sort of movie that I'm pretty sure we could have shot. If you give me if I paid down my credit cards I have 3 of them, and I'm pretty sure on 3 credit cards we could have shot this movie. It's that bad. We've seen some pretty bad. We talk lovingly and jokingly about Terminator, about the original Terminator movie and the infamous eyeball sequence. It's not even that bad. It's worse. Yes. The special effects in this and the fight scenes or whatever else are so bad. It was trying to watch it again. I was like, I don't even want to watch this. And I love B movies. I love like Pam Grier movies and stuff. And I'm telling you right now, The Big Birdcage looks better than this movie. That's how sad this is. So final words on this movie, and then we really must close this podcast. Robert Cooper, Superman 4 in 10 words or less.
The plot was shitty. It was a whole big corporations are awful. They ruin small town bullshit. And I think if me and you would have got together, Mark, we probably could have made a better villain. We could have made the Nuclear Man at least good. We could have made him at least Dave Mustaine levels of sinister.
Well, he wouldn't have been defeated by a cloudy day. Let's get that straight.
He'd be screwed if they took him to Antarctica or something. Unlike when
I was going to say, he could have defeated the Nuclear Man in Seattle.
Wait. So you could basically, okay, your wife loves Twilight, right?
Oh, God.
I'm just hang on. During a stretch of 48-hour insomnia, I did read the books. They live in that location because statistically it has the least amount of sunlight in the world, I think. Couldn't they just transport the Nuclear Man there?
Yeah.
You're in a cave somewhere? Come on.
Well, that reminds
Superman
me.
Superman can literally fly on top of him.
Well, there's a sequence where the Nuclear Man brings whatever the name of the character is into space, and she has no problem breathing. It's Mariel Hemingway. Like King Kong. He kidnaps Mariel Hemingway and brings her into space. It's like when they were writing this and shooting this, no one thought for a moment, hey, this is where we need to draw the line. This has gone beyond stupid.
We've gone full retard.
Yeah, that's when the movie went full retard for me. Winfree, any 10 words or less, anything you want to say about Superman 4 that I have not mentioned or that needs mentioning?
Sweet zombie Jesus, this sucks.
This movie was so bad. How bad was it? It was so bad that they don't do another Superman movie until Superman Returns, which then in turn ignores this movie. Right down to the fact that I think they bring Martha Kent back to life. I think we've said all there is to say in the amount of time that we have left about these Superman movies. I bid you be well, be safe, and behave.